The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy that flows through star systems, nebulae, and the vast dark between worlds. For thousands of generations, the Jedi had taught that the Force was omnipresent, that nothing existed beyond its reach. But what happens when something from beyond the stars arrives? Something the Force itself cannot touch, cannot predict, cannot comprehend. The twin suns of Tatooine blazed mercilessly over the dune sea, their heat rippling across endless waves of sand. Moisture farmer Owen Lars stood outside his homestead, photoreceptor binoculars pressed to his weathered face as he scanned the morning sky. He'd heard the sonic boom, a sound that had rattled the vaporators and sent his nephew Luke running outside in alarm. But there was no ship, no contrail, no debris pattern consistent with a crashed freighter or damaged Imperial patrol. Just a streak of blue and red that had torn across the sky like a meteor, except meteors didn't change direction mid-flight. "Uncle Owen," Luke called from the homestead entrance, his young face creased with concern. "What was it?" Owen lowered the binoculars slowly, his jaw tight. In all his years on this Force-forsaken rock, he'd seen strange things. Tusken raiders, crate dragons, even a Jedi or two back before the Empire had hunted them to near extinction. But this was different. "Get inside," Owen said quietly. "And if anyone asks, Imperial, Hutt cartel, doesn't matter. You didn't see anything." 20 kilometers away, buried 3 meters deep in a sand dune, Kal-El of Krypton opened his eyes. His first conscious thought was pain, a dull, throbbing ache that radiated through his entire body. Not the sharp agony of kryptonite exposure, but something else. Something wrong. His cellular structure felt muted, like every atom in his body was vibrating at a frequency just slightly off from what it should be. Clark Kent pushed upward, and the sand exploded around him as he rose into the air. Instinct and muscle memory carried him clear of the dune, and he hovered 10 feet above the desert floor, his red cape settling around his shoulders as he took stock of his surroundings. Desert, endless, unforgiving desert beneath twin suns that burned with an unfamiliar intensity. The sky was the wrong shade of blue. The air tasted different, drier, thinner, with a metallic quality he couldn't place. And the silence, even his super hearing, which could normally detect heartbeats from miles away, picked up nothing but the whisper of wind across sand. Where was he? The last thing Clark remembered was pursuing a Phantom Zone breach over Metropolis. The villains had tried to tear open a dimensional rift, and Superman had been closing it when some massive surge of energy, had grabbed him and pulled. Not into the Phantom Zone, but somewhere else entirely. The sensation had been like falling through a tunnel of compressed space, stars and galaxies blurring past in impossible configurations, until impact. Superman touched down on the sand, his boots sinking slightly into the superheated grains. He closed his eyes and focused, trying to extend his hearing. Normally, he could hear the entire planet Earth if he concentrated, every voice, every heartbeat, every whisper of wind and wave. But here, there was only static. Not literal static, but something that felt like interference. An omnipresent hum that seemed to emanate from everything and nothing, a vibration that existed at the edge of perception. He'd never felt anything like it. A mechanical whirring sound broke the silence. Superman's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the hovering object approaching from the east. It was small, roughly spherical, with a single glowing optical sensor and several articulated appendages. As it drew closer, Clark realized it was some kind of drone or probe, its design unlike anything from Earth. Sleek, elegant, with a level of sophistication that suggested advanced technology. The probe halted 50 meters away, its sensor array focusing on Superman with what could only be described as mechanical confusion. A beam of blue light swept across Clark's body, some kind of scanning mechanism. Then the probe's sensor array flashed red, and it pivoted sharply, accelerating back toward the eastern horizon at remarkable speed. Superman frowned. That wasn't good. He lifted into the air, preparing to follow, when his enhanced vision finally focused on what lay beyond the eastern dunes. A settlement. Small, dusty, composed of domed structures that looked like they'd been sandblasted for decades. And beyond that, something larger. A town, perhaps, carved into rock formations that jutted from the desert like ancient teeth. People, there were people here. Relief flooded through Clark's chest. Wherever he was, it wasn't uninhabited. Someone could tell him what planet this was, what system, what. The thought died as his vision suddenly sharpened, his X-ray vision activating reflexively as he focused on the distant settlement. And what he saw inside those domed structures made his blood run cold. Humans, or humanoid at least, but also others. Creatures with reptilian features, beings with multiple arms, something that looked like a walking brain with tentacles. All interacting, talking, trading in what appeared to be a marketplace. This wasn't Earth. This wasn't even Earth's solar system. Superman hung suspended in the desert air, the twin suns beating down on his shoulders as the full implications crashed over him. He'd been pulled across space, maybe across dimensions, into a place where multiple alien species coexisted openly, where technology that looked generations beyond Earth's current level was apparently commonplace, where probe droids scanned strangers and then fled to report their findings, where he might be stranded. The sound of engines cut through his spiraling thoughts. Superman turned, his super hearing finally latching onto something concrete. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north at high speed, their engines producing a distinctive repulsor hum. As they crested the nearest dune, Clark's eyes widened. 4 spacecraft, small, angular, painted pristine white, raced across the sand in formation. They looked like military vehicles, aggressive in design, with visible weapon systems mounted beneath their cockpits. As they closed to within a kilometer, Superman's enhanced vision picked out details that made his tactical instincts flare warning signals. The pilots wore white armor, full body coverage, helmets with distinctive black visors, and each one carried what looked like rifles with glowing power cells. Military, organized, professional. And all their weapons were pointed at him. The lead speeder came to a hovering halt 30 meters away, kicking up sand. The white-armored soldier in the passenger seat stood, raising what was clearly a loudspeaker device. Unidentified individual. The voice was mechanically filtered, emotionless. You are in violation of Imperial airspace restrictions. Descend to ground level and submit to identification protocols immediately. Imperial. The word carried weight, implied structure. An empire meant government, civilization, infrastructure. These soldiers served someone, which meant there was authority here, organization, potentially people who could help him find a way home. Superman raised his hands slowly, palms outward in what he hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. I'm not looking for trouble, he called out, his voice carrying easily across the desert. I'm lost. I need to speak with whoever's in charge. Final warning, the soldier barked. Descend immediately or we will open fire. Clark hesitated. These soldiers were scared. He could hear it in the elevated heart rates, see it in their tense postures. They'd found something their probe couldn't identify, something that looked human but had survived what must have appeared to be an impossible crash landing. They were following protocol, trying to maintain control of a situation that clearly unnerved them. He should comply. Leia talked this through, explain his situation calmly and rationally. But something made Clark pause. Maybe it was the way these soldiers held their weapons, not like peacekeepers but like occupiers. Maybe it was the term Imperial, which carried uncomfortable historical parallels. Or maybe it was the simple fact that he'd just been ripped away from his home, from Lois, from everything he knew, and these armed strangers were the first beings he'd encountered. The soldier's finger moved toward his rifle's trigger. Superman made his decision. He dropped to the sand, landing with enough force to create a small crater and straighten to his full height. "I'll come peacefully," he said clearly, "but I'm not a threat, I just need." The soldier fired. The bolt of red energy crossed the distance in a fraction of a second, faster than a bullet, screaming through the air with a sound like tearing fabric. It struck Superman square in the chest and dissipated harmlessly, the energy spreading across his suit's Kryptonian fabric before fading into nothingness. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Superman looked down at his chest, at the point of impact where his stylized S-shield remained completely unmarked, then back up at the soldiers. The confusion and fear in their body language was palpable now, their weapons wavering as they tried to process what they'd just witnessed. "I told you," Clark said softly, "I'm not a threat." Then all 4 speeders opened fire simultaneously. The desert erupted in a storm of red bolts, dozens of blaster shots screaming towards Superman from multiple angles. Energy weapons, some kind of plasma-based technology, Clark's mind cataloged automatically, each one packing enough force to vaporize steel. The barrage was relentless, professional, designed to overwhelm any target through sheer volume of fire. Superman stood in the center of the firestorm and didn't move. The bolts struck his body, his arms, his face. They splashed across his suit like water against stone, their energy dispersing into the air around him. The sand at his feet turned to glass from the ambient heat, but Superman himself remained utterly untouched. He didn't even flinch. After 10 seconds of sustained fire, the weapons fell silent. One of the soldiers' rifles clattered to the floor of his speeder, the sound carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. Superman took a step forward and all 4 speeders immediately reversed, their pilots' panic overriding military discipline. "Wait," Clark called out, frustration creeping into his voice. "I don't want to fight you. Just take me to whoever's in charge." The lead speeder's pilot made a sharp gesture, and the formation broke apart, engines screaming as they accelerated in different directions. Clearly, they decided that whatever he was, it was above their pay grade to handle. All except one. The trailing speeder, perhaps piloted by someone braver or more foolish than his comrades, swung around in a wide arc. Its forward weapons, heavier than the rifles, mounted directly to the vehicle's chassis, began to glow with building energy. Some kind of cannon, Clark realized. Something with more punch than the small arms. "Don't," Superman said, his voice carrying a note of warning. The cannon fired. The beam was thicker, brighter, a concentrated lance of energy that turned the air white-hot along its path. It struck Superman in the center of mass with enough force to level a building. Clark slid backward 3 feet, his boots carving furrows in the sand. The sensation was startling. Not pain, exactly, but pressure. Actual pressure against his chest. The first physical force he'd felt since arriving in this place that had managed to move him at all. The beam held for 2 full seconds, pouring megajoules of energy into Superman's invulnerable body, and Clark had to brace himself against the push. Then the cannon overloaded, sparks erupting from its housing as the weapon failed catastrophically. The speeder pilot didn't wait to see the result. The vehicle spun on its axis and raced after its companions, leaving Superman alone once more in the desert. Clark looked down at his chest again. Still no damage. No burns, no marks, nothing. But that cannon had actually pushed him. Not much. Less than what a strong wind on Earth might accomplish, but it had moved him. Whatever these weapons were, they carried real force. Against a normal person, or even most metahumans, they'd be lethal. Which meant he'd just been shot at with deadly weapons by what appeared to be military forces. Which meant he needed to be very, very careful about how he proceeded. Superman lifted into the air again, rising to 1,000 feet as he scanned the horizon. The settlement he'd spotted earlier was still there, but now he could see more. Roads, or what passed for them, more structures in the distance, and further out, what looked like a proper city built into a massive rock formation, its buildings stacked and interconnected in ways that suggested centuries of construction. Somewhere down there, people lived, worked, went about their lives under these twin suns, and somewhere there had to be someone who could explain where he was and how to get home. But those soldiers, those Imperial forces, had opened fire on sight, which suggested this wasn't a peaceful place, which suggested that walking into that city as an obvious outsider might cause more problems than it solved. Clark hovered in the hot desert air, the twin suns of Tatooine beating down on his shoulders, and felt truly alone for the first time since leaving Krypton as an infant. He was stranded on an alien world, in an alien galaxy, with no idea how to return home. The people here had weapons that actually affected him, even if only slightly, and he just announced his presence in the most dramatic way possible to what appeared to be a military force. Somewhere far above Tatooine, in the cold void of space, an Imperial Star Destroyer received an urgent transmission from the surface. The probe droid scans, the speeder patrols combat footage, all of it uploaded in seconds to the massive warship's central computer. And in the Star Destroyer's meditation chamber, a figure clad in black armor and a flowing cape turned toward the transmission display, his mechanical breathing filling the silence. Darth Vader studied the footage of an indestructible man standing calmly in a storm of blaster fire, and for the first time in years, felt something that almost resembled curiosity. "Prepare my shuttle," Vader's deep voice rumbled. "I will investigate this anomaly personally." The city of Mos Eisley squatted on Tatooine's northern hemisphere like a diseased growth. All cramped streets, shadowed archways, and buildings bleached bone white by generations of sandstorms. It was a wretched hive of scum and villainy, as one old hermit had once described it, and the description remained accurate even after that hermit's death. Here, in the cantinas and docking bays, smugglers rubbed shoulders with bounty hunters. Spice traders conducted business beside Imperial informants, and everyone kept at least one hand near their weapon. It was into this nest of carefully maintained chaos that word spread like wildfire. Something had landed in the Dune Sea, something the Empire couldn't kill. In the darkened corner of Chalmun's cantina, a Rhodian information broker named Tico listened to the third retelling of the story in as many hours, each version more embellished than the last, and made careful notes on his datapad. The details varied wildly. Some said it was a new type of battle droid. Others claimed it was a Force user, a surviving Jedi who'd learned to make himself invulnerable. One drunk moisture farmer swore it was a god from the old Tatooine legends, come to punish the Empire for its crimes. But certain facts remained consistent across every telling. Humanoid, flying without mechanical assistance, completely immune to blaster fire, and currently somewhere in the desert. Tico encoded his notes, attached a hefty price tag, and transmitted the package to 6 different buyers across the galaxy. By the time his drink arrived, 3 had already responded with bids. The 4th response came from an encrypted Imperial channel, and the price offered made Tico's antenna twitch with surprise. Someone very high up wanted this information very badly. Superman landed in a narrow canyon 15 kilometers south of Mos Eisley, his boots touching down on sun-baked rock as he finally allowed himself a moment to think. The past 3 hours had been an exercise in controlled chaos. After the speeder patrol had fled, Clark had spent the time exploring Tatooine from the air, staying high enough to avoid immediate detection while his enhanced vision cataloged details of this strange new world. What he'd discovered had only deepened his confusion. This wasn't just an alien planet. This was an entire civilization. No, an entire galaxy of civilizations, operating at a technological level that surpassed Earth in some ways while lagging behind in others. The cities he'd observed from altitude showed evidence of advanced materials science and energy generation, but the weapons technology seemed crude compared to what LexCorp had developed. The vehicles used some kind of anti-gravity propulsion, yet moved at speeds a fighter jet could match. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, he saw evidence of military occupation. Those white-armored soldiers patrolled every settlement he'd observed. Their ships, massive, wedge-shaped vessels that hung in orbit like artificial moons, maintained constant position over major population centers. Clark's telescopic vision had picked out details on those ships that made his jaw tighten: weapons batteries, tractor beam projectors, and what looked disturbingly like planetary bombardment systems. Whatever this empire was, it ruled through overwhelming force. Clark settled onto a flat rock and closed his eyes, trying once more to extend his hearing beyond the strange interference that seemed to pervade this place. That omnipresent hum he'd noticed earlier, it was getting easier to filter out, but it still made precision listening difficult, like trying to hear a whisper in a room full of white noise. Concentrate, he told himself. There have to be answers somewhere. Gradually, voices began to resolve out of the static. Hundreds of them, thousands, all speaking languages that should have been incomprehensible but somehow weren't. Clark's brow furrowed as he focused on this unexpected development. The words were alien, utterly foreign in structure and sound, yet his mind translated them automatically, as if some universal constant was bridging the linguistic gap. Triple the usual rate, no negotiations. Spotted near Anchorhead, the Empire's locked down the hole. Can't be a Jedi, they're all dead, I'm telling you. Lord Vader himself, coming down from the Star Destroyer. Superman's eyes snapped open. Lord Vader. The name carried weight in every conversation where it appeared, spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence that Clark recognized instantly. He'd heard that tone before, in Metropolis, when people spoke about Lex Luthor during his worst periods of megalomania. This Vader was important, powerful, and apparently he was coming here. Because of me, Clark realized with a sinking feeling. Because I couldn't just land quietly and ask for help like a normal person. Because I had to survive weapons fire and make myself the biggest curiosity on the entire planet. The sound of repulsor engines, closer now, multiple vehicles, cut through his thoughts. Superman rose from the rock and turned toward the canyon entrance just as 6 Imperial speeder bikes rounded the corner in perfect formation. These were different from the patrol vehicles he'd encountered earlier, sleeker, faster, with mounted weapons that tracked his position with mechanical precision. But it was the figure on the lead bike that made Clark's enhanced vision focus with sudden intensity. The rider wore armor similar to the white-armored soldiers, but in black instead of white. The helmet design was more elaborate, the rank insignia on the chest plate suggesting command authority. As the speeders formed a semicircle around Superman's position, the black-armored figure dismounted with fluid grace and approached to within 10 meters before stopping. Unidentified life form. The voice was human, male, clipped with military efficiency. You will accompany us for Imperial processing. Resistance will be met with lethal force. Clark raised his hands again, keeping his voice calm and steady. I'm not resisting, but I need to explain I'm not from here. I was brought to this planet against my will, and I'm trying to find a way. All communications are being recorded, the officer interrupted, as if Clark hadn't spoken. Biological scans indicate human physiology with unexplained anomalies. Threat assessment, maximum. You will surrender immediately or... I've already tried to surrender, Superman said, frustration bleeding into his tone despite his best efforts. Your patrol shot at me first. I defended myself by standing there. I haven't hurt anyone. I just need to speak with someone who can help me understand where I am. The officer's hand moved toward his sidearm, a more compact version of the rifles Clark had seen earlier. Final warning, comply or... A shadow fell across the canyon. It wasn't a natural shadow, born of clouds or rock formations. This was too sudden, too complete, as if something had simply erased the sunlight from existence. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds, and every soldier in the canyon suddenly went rigid, their body language shifting from aggressive to something that looked disturbingly like terror. Superman looked up. The ship descending into the canyon was smaller than the massive Star Destroyers in orbit, but no less intimidating. Angular, predatory, colored the deep gray of durasteel with black accents that seemed to absorb light. Its repulsor systems made no sound as it settled onto the canyon floor, and the boarding ramp extended with hydraulic precision. For several heartbeats, nothing moved. Then a figure emerged from the ship's interior, and Clark Kent felt his instincts scream danger in a way they hadn't since facing Doomsday. The man, if it was a man, stood over 2 meters tall, encased in armor that was equal parts mechanical and ornate. Black as the void of space, the suit covered every centimeter of his body, with a chest plate that housed what looked like a control interface and life support systems. The helmet was the most striking feature, a mask of polished black metal with a triangular grille and large, expressionless eye lenses that reflected the canyon walls like dark mirrors. But it was the cape that triggered something in Clark's memory, black, flowing, utterly impractical for combat yet worn with absolute authority. He'd seen that kind of cape before. He wore one himself. This being understood the power of symbols. The figure descended the ramp with measured steps, and with each footfall, Clark heard something that made his super hearing focus with laser intensity, mechanical breathing. Deep, rhythmic, supported by what sounded like a sophisticated respirator system. This person was using technology just to stay alive. The black-armored officer and his troops immediately dropped to one knee, their weapons lowered in what was clearly a gesture of absolute submission. "Lord Vader," the officer said, his voice tight with barely controlled fear, "the target has been contained, awaiting your orders." The tall figure, Vader, ignored the officer entirely. Those expressionless lenses fixed on Superman with an intensity that Clark could almost feel, like a physical pressure against his skin. For a long moment, the Dark Lord of the Sith simply studied this impossible anomaly, his breathing the only sound in the canyon. Then Vader spoke, and his voice was a deep mechanical bass that seemed to resonate in the chest rather than the ears. "You are not of this galaxy." It wasn't a question. Clark blinked, surprised by the directness. "No," he admitted carefully. "I'm from a place called Earth. I was pulled here by some kind of dimensional rift. I'm not looking for trouble, I just want to find a way home." "Earth?" Vader repeated the word as if tasting it, analyzing it. "This name appears in no Imperial database. Your technology," the lenses focused on Superman's suit, "is unfamiliar. Your biology defies standard classification, and you possess abilities that should not be possible without the Force." "The Force?" Clark seized on the unfamiliar term. "What's the Force?" The silence that followed was profound. Every soldier in the canyon shifted uncomfortably, as if Clark had just committed some terrible blasphemy. Even through the helmets, Superman could hear their heart rates spike with shock. Vader tilted his head slightly, and Clark got the distinct impression the masked figure was reassessing everything he'd assumed. "You do not know the Force," Vader said slowly, "yet you fly without mechanical assistance. You withstand weapons that would destroy Duraplast armor. You exist outside the natural order." The Dark Lord took a single step forward, and despite himself, despite every instinct that told him this person was dangerous, Clark held his ground. He wouldn't be intimidated. Not by armor, not by theatrics, not by... Vader raised one gloved hand, and Superman felt something wrap around his throat. Not physical hands, not a tangible object, but pressure, real, undeniable pressure that constricted his airway with steadily increasing force. Clark's hands flew to his neck reflexively, finding nothing to grab, nothing to fight against. The pressure intensified, and for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, Superman felt something that shocked him to his core. Discomfort. Not pain, not yet. His Kryptonian physiology was still far too durable for that. But the sensation was real, measurable, affecting him in a way the blaster fire and energy cannons hadn't. Whatever Vader was doing, it was bypassing his invulnerability somehow, acting directly on his body through means Clark didn't understand. "Impossible." Vader's mechanical voice carried a note of something that might have been surprise. "You resist. No being resists the Force without training, without connection to it themselves. What are you?" The pressure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Clark gasped, more from shock than need for air, and stared at Vader with new understanding. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was something else entirely. Something that operated on principles Clark's scientific mind couldn't immediately categorize. "I told you," Superman said, his voice steady despite the lingering sensation of that invisible grip. "I'm from Earth. My name is Kal-El, but most people know me as Superman. I came here by accident, and I mean no harm to you or your empire." "You mean no harm," Vader repeated, and somehow the mechanical voice managed to convey skepticism. Yet you survived engagement with an Imperial patrol. You show no fear in my presence, and you possess power that rivals. The Dark Lord paused, and Clark saw those lenses tilt slightly upward, as if Vader was receiving information through some unseen channel. "The Emperor wishes to speak with you," Vader said finally. "You will come willingly, or I will bring you in pieces. The choice is yours." Clark's jaw tightened. The threat was clear, delivered with absolute confidence. This Vader believed he could actually harm Superman if necessary, which suggested either phenomenal arrogance or knowledge of capabilities Clark hadn't yet witnessed. But more importantly, there was an Emperor, a single individual who apparently commanded this entire military force, who Vader himself answered to. Someone with enough authority to potentially help Superman find answers about this galaxy and how to leave it. Of course, being summoned by an emperor who ruled through fear and overwhelming military force wasn't exactly promising. Every instinct Clark possessed, every lesson learned from facing dictators and tyrants on Earth, screamed warning. "I'll come," Superman said carefully, "but as a guest, not a prisoner. I want to talk to your emperor, explain my situation, and ask for help finding a way home. That's all." "You are in no position to negotiate terms," Vader stated flatly. "Neither are you," Clark replied, his voice hardening slightly. "Your weapons don't hurt me. Your force abilities," he gestured at his throat, "are uncomfortable at best. I've been polite and cooperative, but I'm not going to be treated like a criminal for the crime of being lost." The tension in the canyon became palpable. The kneeling soldiers didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. Their commanding officer had gone absolutely rigid, as if waiting for Vader to strike this insolent fool dead where he stood. But Vader simply regarded Superman with those expressionless lenses, his mechanical breathing the only sound. "You have courage," the Dark Lord finally said. "Foolish courage, but courage nonetheless. Very well. You will accompany me to the Executor, flagship of the Imperial Navy. There you will speak with the Emperor through secure transmission. If he is satisfied with your explanation, you will be granted guest status. If not..." Vader left the threat unfinished, but the implication was clear. "The Executor?" Clark asked. "My personal Star Destroyer," Vader clarified. "Currently in high orbit. You will travel aboard my shuttle, unless you prefer to fly alongside it and announce your presence to every sensor array between here and orbit." Clark considered his options. He could refuse, could fly off and try to navigate this situation alone. But that would make him a fugitive in a galaxy he didn't understand, on a planet where he didn't know the rules. Better to cooperate for now and see what this Emperor wanted. Besides, part of him was curious. This force ability that Vader wielded, the invisible pressure that had actually affected him, suggested powers that operated on principles beyond conventional physics. If Superman was going to be stuck in this galaxy, he needed to understand what he was dealing with. "I'll take the shuttle," Clark decided, "but I want your word that I'm not being arrested, that this is a diplomatic meeting." "You have my word," Vader said, in a tone that suggested his word was binding. "You will be treated as an anomaly requiring investigation, not as a criminal, unless you prove yourself to be one." It wasn't reassuring, but it was something. Superman followed Vader toward the Lambda-class shuttle, acutely aware of how the Imperial soldiers maintained maximum distance as he passed. Their body language spoke of deep unease, not just fear, but a kind of existential confusion. They'd been trained to handle threats, but what was the protocol for something that couldn't be threatened? As Clark stepped aboard the shuttle, he caught a glimpse of Tatooine's twin suns through the viewport, different from Earth's sun, burning with that slightly alien quality that made his cells hum with less than optimal energy. He was really here, really stranded in an alien galaxy, about to meet with an emperor who commanded armies across star systems. Lois would have had a field day with this story. The thought brought a sharp pang of homesickness, quickly suppressed. He'd find a way back. He always found a way. Vader took a position near the viewport, standing with his back to Superman in a posture that suggested complete confidence. No fear of attack from behind. No concern that this invulnerable stranger might try something. The shuttle's engines hummed to life, and the canyon fell away as they lifted toward orbit. "Tell me, Superman," Vader said without turning, his mechanical voice cutting through the engine noise. "How does one become immune to the Force?" Clark frowned at the phrasing. "I don't know what the Force is, so I can't tell you why it doesn't affect me the same way it affects others. Where I come from, my abilities are the result of my alien biology interacting with solar radiation. Yellow sun energy powers my cells." Solar radiation. Vader finally turned, those lenses focusing on Clark with renewed interest. "You are sustained by starlight alone." "More or less. It's more complicated than that, but yes, my powers come from absorbing and metabolizing solar energy. And without this energy..." Clark hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. "I weaken. Eventually, I'd lose my abilities entirely, but that takes time, extended time without any solar exposure." "Fascinating." Vader moved to a console, his gloved fingers dancing across controls. "The Emperor will wish to know this. He has experience with beings whose power derives from external sources." The way Vader said experience made Clark's instincts flare warning again. This Emperor wasn't just a political leader. He was someone who understood power on a fundamental level. Someone who might see Superman not as a person needing help, but as a resource to be exploited. Through the viewport, Tatooine shrank to a tan sphere below them, and ahead, growing larger by the second, was a ship that defied comprehension. The Executor was massive beyond any scale Clark had reference for. Over 19 kilometers long, wedge-shaped, bristling with weapons batteries and sensor arrays. It hung in space like a city, like a small moon, absolutely dwarfing every other vessel in orbit. This wasn't just a warship. This was a statement of absolute military dominance. And Superman was flying directly into its hangar bay. As the shuttle passed through the magnetic field containment and settled onto the deck, Clark saw hundreds of personnel moving with mechanical efficiency. Stormtroopers in formation, officers in gray uniforms, droids of various configurations. All of them stopped and turned as Vader's shuttle doors opened. All of them stared as Superman emerged behind the Dark Lord. Vader didn't acknowledge the attention, simply strode forward with his cape billowing behind him. "Follow," he commanded, and Clark complied, hyper-aware of every eye tracking his movement. They walked through corridors of polished metal, past crew members who saluted Vader and then immediately diverted their gaze from Superman, as if looking at him directly might be dangerous. The ship hummed with power, generators far more sophisticated than anything Earth had developed, yet based on principles Clark's superintellect was beginning to understand. Fusion reactors, matter-antimatter containment, hypermatter annihilation. This civilization had mastered energy generation on a scale that put Earth centuries behind. Finally, Vader led Superman into a chamber that was clearly designed for private communication. The walls were dark, sound dampened, with a single holoprojector in the center of the room. No windows, no other exits. A trap, potentially, but Clark had committed to this path. "Wait here," Vader commanded, and left without another word, the doors hissing shut behind him. Superman stood alone in the dim chamber, his super hearing tracking Vader's footsteps as they moved deeper into the ship. Beyond the walls, he could hear thousands of conversations, hundreds of systems operating, the thrumming pulse of a warship at operational status. And he could hear faintly what sounded like a transmission being established, encrypted, scrambled, but using frequencies his hearing could still detect. Someone was calling the Emperor. Minutes passed. Clark used the time to center himself, to prepare for whatever came next. He'd faced dictators before, Darkseid, Mongol, beings of immense power who ruled through fear. He knew how to handle them, stay calm, show no weakness, find common ground if possible. But something about this situation felt different. That invisible pressure Vader had exerted, that force, ability, it suggested powers Clark didn't fully understand yet. And if this Emperor possessed similar or greater abilities? The holoprojector activated without warning. The figure that materialized was human, elderly, draped in dark robes that concealed most of his form. But it was the face that captured Clark's attention, deeply lined with age, eyes sharp with intelligence, and a smile that was somehow more unsettling than any expression of anger could be. "Ah," the Emperor said, his voice soft and granular like sand across stone. "The anomaly, the impossible man, tell me, stranger from beyond, what brings you to my galaxy?" Superman met those sharp eyes steadily and felt the weight of attention from one of the most powerful beings in this entire civilization. "Accident," Clark said simply, "and a very desperate desire to go home." The Emperor's smile widened, and Superman felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "How unfortunate for you." The holographic image of Emperor Palpatine flickered with faint distortion, a consequence of the vast distance between Coruscant and Tatooine's orbit. But the intelligence behind those yellow-tinged eyes was razor-sharp. Superman stood before the projection, acutely aware that every word, every micro-expression, every shift in posture was being analyzed by one of the most powerful individuals in this galaxy. "Your name," the Emperor continued, his voice deceptively gentle, "is Superman. How theatrical. Tell me, does your world have many such colorfully titled heroes?" Clark kept his expression neutral. "Where I come from, those who have power use it to protect people who don't. The title is meant to inspire hope." Hope, Palpatine seemed to taste the word, his thin lips curving into something that might have been amusement. A precious commodity, hope, dangerous too when placed in the wrong hands, or when offered by the wrong savior. "I'm not offering anything," Superman said carefully. "I didn't choose to come here. I'm asking for help finding a way back to my own dimension." The Emperor clasped his hands within his robes, the gesture almost grandfatherly. "Lord Vader informs me that you possess remarkable abilities, invulnerability to conventional weapons, flight without mechanical assistance, and most intriguingly," those sharp eyes glinted, "you appear to exist outside the Force itself. Do you understand how unprecedented this is?" "I don't know what the Force is," Clark admitted. "Where I come from, my abilities are the result of my alien biology. I'm Kryptonian, from a planet called Krypton that was destroyed when I was an infant. Earth's yellow sun gives me powers that—" Yes, Palpatine interrupted with a dismissive wave. "Solar radiation metabolization," Vader explained. "What interests me far more is this immunity to the Force. You see, Superman, the Force is omnipresent. It binds the galaxy together, connects all living things. For millennia, those sensitive to the Force have shaped the destiny of civilizations. The Jedi sought to maintain peace through their rigid dogma. I and others like me understood that true order requires strength." Clark's eyes narrowed slightly. "The Jedi, Vader mentioned them. He said they were all dead." "Not all," the Emperor corrected softly. "A few remnants survive, scattered and hunted. They were a threat to galactic stability, Superman. An order of religious zealots who believed their connection to the Force gave them authority to dictate policy to the Senate. When they attempted to assassinate me and overthrow the legitimate government, they were dealt with accordingly." It was smoothly delivered, the cadence of a practiced politician spinning a narrative. Clark had heard similar speeches before. Tyrants always had justifications for their purges, always framed their victims as the aggressors. But he kept his expression neutral, filing away the information. "I see," was all Clark said. Palpatine studied him for a long moment, and Superman got the distinct impression the Emperor was testing him, probing for reactions. "You doubt my words. Understandable, you have no context for our galaxy's politics. But consider, I offer you an opportunity. My empire spans thousands of systems, commands resources beyond measure. If anyone can help you find a way back to your dimension, it is I in exchange." Here it comes, Clark thought. "You would serve as an advisor, a consultant on matters requiring your unique perspective. Nothing more sinister than that, I assure you. You would be granted diplomatic immunity, freedom of movement throughout Imperial space, and access to our most advanced scientific facilities." It was a tempting offer, delivered with perfect sincerity. And that was precisely why Clark's instincts screamed danger. "Advisor on what matters?" Superman asked carefully. "Threats to galactic peace," Palpatine replied smoothly. "Remnant Jedi cells, terrorist organizations, pirates and slavers who prey on innocent systems. You claim to be a protector of the innocent. I offer you the resources to protect billions across thousands of worlds." Clark felt the weight of the proposition. On Earth, he operated solo or with the Justice League, handling threats as they emerged. But here, in a galaxy of billions across countless star systems, the scale was incomprehensible. If this empire truly had the infrastructure to coordinate protection on that scale, and if Clark could influence it toward justice rather than oppression. But then he remembered the white-armored soldiers, the massive Star Destroyers hovering over population centers, the way Vader had threatened to bring him in pieces without hesitation. This wasn't a government built on consent of the governed. This was a military dictatorship. "I appreciate the offer," Superman said slowly, "but I'm not interested in getting involved in your galaxy's politics. I just want to go home. If you can help me do that, I'm grateful. If not, I'll find another way." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Palpatine's grandfatherly expression didn't change, but something shifted behind those eyes, a flash of something cold and ancient. "You misunderstand your situation, Superman. You are an extra-dimensional anomaly in possession of powers that defy natural law. Left unchecked, you represent a threat to galactic stability. I am offering you a choice: cooperation or containment." "Containment," Clark's voice hardened. "You mean imprisonment." "I mean ensuring you cause no harm. the Emperor corrected. "Surely you understand, a being of your power with no allegiance to any government, no understanding of our laws or customs. You are, by definition, a rogue element, one that must be accounted for." Superman took a slow breath, fighting to keep his temper in check. This was exactly the kind of authoritarian logic he'd faced before, the idea that power itself was suspicious, that anyone who couldn't be controlled must be contained. "I've committed no crime. I've hurt no one. You have no right to imprison me." "Rights are defined by those with the power to enforce them," Palpatine said softly. "A lesson you will learn, one way or another." The hologram flickered and died. For 3 heartbeats, Clark stood alone in the dim chamber, processing what had just happened. The Emperor of this galaxy, a being with authority over thousands of worlds, had just given him an ultimatum: serve or be imprisoned. And judging by the power Vader had demonstrated, they believed they could actually enforce that ultimatum. The doors hissed open. Vader stood in the corridor, his mechanical breathing filling the silence. Behind him, 24 stormtroopers had formed up in precise formation, their weapons raised and trained on Superman. "The Emperor has rendered his judgment," Vader intoned. "You will be taken into custody pending transfer to a secure facility. You will not resist." Clark's jaw tightened. "I'm not going to prison for the crime of being lost." "Then you choose death." Vader raised one hand, and this time the Force attack wasn't a gentle demonstration. It was a crushing vice of telekinetic pressure that slammed into Superman from all directions simultaneously, not choking him, but attempting to compress his entire body with force that would have reduced Duraplast to powder. Clark gritted his teeth as the pressure intensified. It wasn't pain, not quite, but it was deeply uncomfortable, like being at the bottom of an ocean trench, with thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch bearing down on every surface of his body. His Kryptonian cellular structure held firm, but the sensation was undeniably real. "You cannot win," Vader stated flatly, his hand clenched into a fist as he poured more power into the attack. "The Force is absolute. You are flesh and bone. You will break." "I'm really not," Superman growled, and took a step forward against the invisible pressure. Vader's lenses widened fractionally, the only sign of surprise the masked figure allowed. The telekinetic grip intensified further, now accompanied by what felt like electrical discharge arcing across Clark's skin. Force lightning, he realized, watching blue-white energy crawl over his suit. It stung, actually stung more than the blaster fire had. The Force lightning was bypassing his invulnerability to some degree, interacting with his bioelectric field in ways that caused genuine discomfort. Not injury, his cells were still far too resilient for that, but actual sensation. Clark took another step forward. "Impossible," Vader breathed, and Superman heard actual strain in that mechanical voice now. The Dark Lord was exerting significant effort, channeling power through this mystical force, and achieving only marginal results. "I told you," Clark said, his voice tight with the effort of moving against the pressure. "I'm not from your galaxy. Your rules don't apply to me." He took a third step, now within arm's reach of Vader. The stormtroopers opened fire. 24 blaster rifles discharged simultaneously, filling the corridor with a storm of red energy bolts. The barrage struck Superman from every angle: shoulders, back, chest, face, each impact releasing a small burst of dispersed energy that turned the air around him into a superheated haze. Clark didn't even slow down. He reached Vader, and before the Dark Lord could react, Superman's hand closed around his wrist, the one still raised in the Force grip. Clark didn't squeeze hard, didn't try to harm, just held firm with enough pressure to make his point. "Stop," Superman said quietly, his blue eyes meeting Vader's expressionless lenses. "I don't want to fight you. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I won't be imprisoned for trying to get home." For a long moment, Vader simply stared at this impossible being who had walked through Force attacks and blaster fire as if they were nothing more than rain. The Dark Lord's breathing cycled once, twice, 3 times through its mechanical rhythm. Then Vader's free hand moved in a sharp gesture, and Superman felt something massive and metallic tear free from the corridor wall behind him. Clark's superhearing gave him a fraction of a second's warning. He released Vader's wrist and spun, catching the Durasteel support beam, easily 2 tons of reinforced metal, before it could be telekinetically hurled into the stormtroopers. The beam crumpled in his grip like aluminum foil. "Really?" Clark said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "You're going to risk killing your own troops just to—" The entire corridor erupted in chaos. More telekinetic attacks, not aimed at Superman, but at everything around him. Wall panels tore free, ceiling supports buckled. The deck plating itself began to warp and tear as Vader unleashed the full fury of the dark side. It wasn't about harming Superman directly anymore. It was about creating a maelstrom of deadly shrapnel that would kill everyone in the corridor if Clark didn't stop it. Superman moved. He became a blur of motion, catching debris, supporting collapsing walls, physically shielding stormtroopers from chunks of metal that would have torn through their armor. His superhuman speed and reflexes worked in overdrive as he prevented Vader's tantrum from becoming a massacre. And through it all, the Dark Lord simply stood in the center of the devastation, his cape billowing in the artificial wind, watching. Testing. When the telekinetic storm finally ceased, the corridor was in ruins, but every single stormtrooper was alive, protected by Superman's intervention. Clark stood in the center of the wreckage, breathing slightly harder from exertion, his cape torn in several places but otherwise unharmed. "You protected them," Vader observed, his tone analytical rather than mocking. "The soldiers who were attempting to capture you. Why?" "Because they're people," Clark said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the universe. "They were following orders. That doesn't mean they deserve to die." Vader tilted his head, and Superman got the impression he just revealed something significant, something the Dark Lord hadn't expected. "You are not a weapon," Vader said slowly, as if working through a logical puzzle. "You are not a conqueror, you are." The mechanical breathing cycled. "Genuinely altruistic, how quaint." "It's called having principles," Clark shot back. "Maybe you should try it sometime." "Principles are a luxury afforded to those without the burden of maintaining order across a galaxy," Vader countered. "But your adherence to them intrigues me. Tell me, Superman, if you are so opposed to harming others, what will you do when the Emperor orders your capture by any means necessary? When Star Destroyers bombard population centers you're trying to protect, forcing you to choose between continued resistance and innocent lives?" The question hit like a physical blow. Clark's expression hardened as he understood the implication. This wasn't just about capturing one anomalous individual. It was about leverage. The Empire would use the very compassion that defined Superman against him, would threaten innocence to force compliance. It was Lex Luthor's playbook, scaled to galactic proportions. "You're bluffing," Superman said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Vader gestured at the corridor wreckage. You just witnessed my willingness to sacrifice my own troops to test your nature. Do you truly believe the Emperor would hesitate to sacrifice civilians? Clark's fists clenched at his sides. This was the nightmare scenario, stranded in an unfamiliar galaxy, facing a government with resources beyond measure, led by individuals willing to use any tactic to maintain control. If he resisted openly, became a fugitive, the Empire would escalate. Innocent people would suffer. But if he surrendered, allowed himself to be imprisoned or controlled, there's another option. A new voice cut through the tension. Both Superman and Vader turned toward the far end of the ruined corridor, where a figure had appeared seemingly from nowhere. A woman in practical flight gear, her dark hair tied back, a blaster pistol holstered at her hip. She was flanked by two others, a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes, and a protocol droid that looked vaguely concerned. The Rebel Alliance, Vader growled, his hand moving toward the lightsaber at his belt. How did you breach this ship's security? The woman smiled, but there was steel in her expression. We have our ways, and we have a proposal for the man who can't be killed. Her eyes fixed on Superman. The Empire wants to cage you. We want to give you a choice. Come with us and we'll help you find your way home without any strings attached. Superman's gaze moved between Vader and the newcomers, his mind racing. The Rebel Alliance, presumably enemies of the Empire, offering freedom instead of imprisonment. It should have been an easy choice. But Clark had learned long ago that nothing was ever that simple. And what, Vader said, his voice dripping with contempt, makes you believe your ragtag insurgency has the resources to assist an extra-dimensional traveler? You can barely feed your own troops. We have something the Empire doesn't, the woman countered. We have people who actually want to help, not control. And we have contacts, scientists, force sensitives, researchers who operated outside Imperial oversight. If anyone can figure out how Superman got here, it's them. She extended a hand toward Clark. My name is Leia Organa. I'm with the Rebel Alliance, and I'm offering you a chance to make your own choice instead of having one forced on you. Leia Organa. The name meant nothing to Clark, but something in her bearing, the confidence, the conviction, the willingness to walk onto an enemy Star Destroyer to recruit him, reminded him of Lois. Someone who wouldn't back down from a fight, even when the odds were impossible. Superman, Vader's mechanical voice carried a note of warning. If you leave with these terrorists, the Emperor will consider you an enemy of the state. Every resource of the Empire will be dedicated to your capture or destruction. Entire systems will burn before we allow an asset of your power to fall into rebel hands. And if I stay, Clark challenged, I become your prisoner, your weapon. You become protected, Vader corrected. The Emperor's resources would be dedicated to finding your way home. You would want for nothing. You would simply need to cooperate during your time here. It was the same offer as before, dressed in slightly softer language, and it still meant surrendering his freedom, his agency, his ability to act according to his own moral compass. Superman looked at Leia Organa, at the determination in her eyes, then at Vader, at the emotionless mask that concealed whatever humanity might still exist beneath. I need more information, Clark said finally, about both of you, about this war you're fighting. I'm not going to choose a side based on whoever recruited me first. There is no neutrality, Vader stated flatly. You will choose or the choice will be made for you. Then I guess I'm making a choice right now, Superman replied. He turned to Leia. "You said you'd help me find my way home, no strings attached. I want that in writing or whatever passes for a binding agreement in this galaxy. And I want to meet your leadership, understand what you're actually fighting for. If I don't like what I see, then you walk away," Leia finished. "No imprisonment, no demands for service. We're not the Empire Superman. We actually mean it when we say freedom." Vader's hand closed around his lightsaber hilt. "If you leave this ship with them, there will be no reconsideration, no negotiation. You will be an enemy." Clark met Vader's expressionless gaze steadily. "I've been called worse things by better people." The crimson blade ignited with a snap hiss, bathing the ruined corridor in blood-red light. "Then you have made your choice," Vader intoned and attacked. The Dark Lord moved with speed that would have been impossible for a normal human, cybernetic enhancement, combining with force-augmented reflexes to launch a strike that could decapitate a Jedi. The lightsaber, a blade of pure plasma contained in a magnetic field, slashed towards Superman's neck in a killing arc. Clark caught the blade with his bare hand. The plasma screamed as it made contact with Kryptonian skin, energy designed to cut through Durasteel, meeting molecular structure more resilient than any material in the Star Wars galaxy. Clark's hand glowed where the blade touched, his cells absorbing and dissipating the thermal energy faster than it could cause damage. But it hurt. Not severely, nothing like kryptonite, but the lightsaber was actually hot enough to register as pain against his invulnerable flesh. Clark gritted his teeth and held firm, the red blade crackling and spitting as it failed to penetrate. "Your weapon can't cut me," Superman said through clenched teeth, "and I really don't want to break it. Please stop." Vader's response was to channel force lightning through the lightsaber itself. Blue-white electricity exploded across Clark's arm, racing up to his shoulder and across his chest. This time the pain was more acute, the electrical discharge interacting with his nervous system in ways that caused genuine agony. Superman's grip on the lightsaber faltered, and Vader immediately disengaged, bringing the blade around for another strike. Clark didn't give him the chance. He moved faster than Vader could track, closing the distance and delivering a carefully controlled push, palm strike to the chest plate that sent the Dark Lord flying backward 15 feet. Not hard enough to kill, not even hard enough to seriously injure, but sufficient to create distance. Vader crashed into the far wall, his armor absorbing most of the impact, and immediately pushed himself upright with the Force. The lightsaber remained in his grip, held in a guard position that suggested extensive combat training. "Leia," Clark called without taking his eyes off Vader, "get your people to safety. I'll handle this." "We're not leaving without you," Leia shouted back, and Clark heard the distinctive sound of blaster fire as the rebels engaged the stormtroopers who'd been scattered by the earlier chaos. This was deteriorating fast. Vader raised his free hand, and Superman felt the Force grip again, this time not trying to crush him, but to immobilize him. Telekinetic pressure wrapped around his limbs, attempting to hold him in place while the Dark Lord advanced with lethal intent. Clark flexed against the invisible bonds and broke free, the sheer physical strength of his Kryptonian musculature overcoming the telekinetic hold through brute force. He could do this all day. Vader's Force abilities affected him, but not enough to actually stop him. The question was, how did he end this without killing anyone? "Lord Vader," a new voice crackled over the ship's intercom. "Rebel infiltration teams have breached sectors 7 through 12. Security is compromised." Vader's lenses snapped toward the nearest comm panel, and in that moment of distraction, Superman made his decision. He crossed the distance to Leia and her companions in less than a second, scooped all three of them up, ignoring their surprised shouts, and rocketed straight up through the corridor ceiling. Durasteel tore like paper as Superman's invulnerable body carved a path through deck after deck of the Executor, moving vertically at speeds approaching Mach 10. The artificial gravity, the structural supports, the reinforced bulkheads, none of it slowed him down. He was a living projectile, carrying 3 passengers and leaving a perfectly Superman-shaped tunnel through the heart of the Star Destroyer. Behind them, alarms shrieked and emergency bulkheads slammed shut, trying to contain the catastrophic hull breach. They burst through the Executor's upper hull into open space, and Superman kept accelerating, putting distance between themselves and the massive warship. The void of space was silent, airless, but Clark's body needed no oxygen. He could survive indefinitely in vacuum. His passengers, unfortunately, could not. Clark quickly assessed the situation. They had maybe 30 seconds before the rebels suffocated. He needed to get them somewhere with atmosphere fast. "Your ship," Superman shouted, forgetting that sound didn't carry in vacuum. He immediately switched tactics, pointing emphatically toward the nearby Star Destroyer hangar bay where he could see several small craft docked. Leia's eyes were wide with oxygen deprivation, but she managed to nod and point toward a sleek Corvette-class vessel painted in distinctive red and white, clearly rebel colors, completely exposed in the Imperial hangar. Superman didn't hesitate. He flew straight toward the hangar, his passengers held carefully against his chest to minimize acceleration stress on their bodies. As they crossed the magnetic containment field and entered breathable atmosphere, all 3 rebels gasped desperately. "That was," the broad-shouldered man wheezed, "absolutely terrifying, thank you." "You are most welcome for the rescue," the protocol droid added in a prim voice. "Though I must note that proper rescue protocols typically involve airlocks and pressure suits." "Not now, 3PO, Leia managed, recovering faster than her companions. She pointed toward the Corvette. "That's the Tantive IV. Get us aboard and we can jump to hyperspace before the Empire recovers." Superman landed on the Corvette's boarding ramp just as turbolaser fire began to lance across the hangar bay. The Executor's defense systems had finally registered the threat, and they were not holding back. Energy bolts the size of small vehicles screamed through the hangar, vaporizing TIE fighters and smaller craft in their attempt to destroy the rebel ship. Clark set the rebels down and turned to face the incoming fire, positioning himself between the turbolaser batteries and the Corvette. The massive energy bolt struck him square in the chest, one after another, each impact releasing energy equivalent to a tactical nuclear weapon. Superman's boots carved furrows in the hangar deck as he was pushed backward by the sustained barrage, but his body held firm. The energy dissipated across his invulnerable form, unable to penetrate, unable to harm. He was a living shield, protecting the rebel ship while its crew scrambled to initiate launch procedures. "Go," Superman shouted over his shoulder. "Get your ship running." "We're not leaving you," Leia yelled back. Even as her companion, Clark caught the name Bale from someone's shout, pulled her toward the boarding ramp. "I'll catch up," Clark promised, though he had no idea if that was true. "Just go." The Tantive IV's engines flared to life, repulsor systems lifting the Corvette off the hangar deck. At the same moment, the hangar's massive blast doors began to close, standard Imperial procedure when infiltrators were detected. In seconds, the rebel ship would be trapped inside, unable to escape. Superman made a split-second decision. He flew toward the closing blast doors, each 150 meters tall and composed of reinforced durasteel designed to withstand capital ship weapons fire. As they ground toward each other, narrowing the exit to space, Clark reached the narrowing gap and braced himself. One hand on each door. And he pushed. The hydraulic system screamed in protest as Superman forced the blast doors apart, his Kryptonian strength pitting itself against machinery designed to move thousands of tons. His muscles strained, actually strained, for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, and the doors groaned but began to separate. Behind him, the Tantive IV accelerated toward the widening gap. Turbolaser fire intensified, now targeting Superman specifically. The impacts hammered against his back, his shoulders, his legs, each one pushing him fractionally backward. But Clark held firm, teeth gritted, every ounce of his considerable strength dedicated to keeping those doors open. The Corvette shot through the gap at full thrust, its shields flaring as it absorbed glancing turbolaser hits. Superman released the doors and flew after it, accelerating to catch up as the Tantive IV oriented toward open space. Behind them, the Executor's weapon systems tracked their escape, and the void lit up with enough firepower to level a city. Superman, Leia's voice crackled over an external comm system. Grab onto the hull. We're jumping to hyperspace in 5 seconds. Clark caught up to the Corvette and grabbed hold of one of the external sensor arrays, his grip careful enough not to crush the delicate equipment. Through the hull, he could hear the distinct hum of hyperspace engines building toward activation. 4 seconds. Behind them, a wing of TIE fighters poured out of the Executor's hangar bays, their twin-ion engines screaming as they gave chase. 3 seconds. More turbolaser fire, closer now, the Empire throwing everything at them to prevent their escape. 2 seconds. Superman saw, with perfect clarity, a trio of proton torpedoes launched from the Executor's tubes, tracking toward the Tantive IV with deadly precision. 1 second. Clark released his grip on the hull and flew to intercept the torpedoes. He caught the first one mid-flight, his hand closing around the warhead just as its proximity sensor registered impact. The detonation was spectacular, a sphere of nuclear fire that would have vaporized the Tantive IV. Superman's body absorbed the blast, his cells channeling away the energy, his invulnerability tested but holding firm. The second torpedo he caught with his other hand. The third one got through. Superman watched in horror as the warhead struck the Tantive IV's aft shields, overloading them in a cascade failure that left the rear quarter of the hull exposed. The explosion tore through the Corvette's engines, sending the ship into an uncontrolled spin. And then, somehow, impossibly, the hyperspace drive activated. The Tantive IV stretched into impossible geometry as it transitioned to faster-than-light travel, reality bending around it in ways that hurt to observe. The ship vanished into hyperspace, damaged, crippled, but escaped. Without Superman, Clark hung in the void, alone, staring at the empty space where the rebel Corvette had been. Around him, TIE fighters were already circling, their laser cannons warming up for attack runs. The Executor loomed massive behind them, and Clark could actually feel, Vader's attention focused on him from somewhere deep inside that ship. He'd made his choice. He'd sided with the rebellion, at least for now, which meant the entire galactic empire, had just become his enemy. Superman took a breath he didn't need in the vacuum of space, looked at the incoming TIE fighters, and made another decision. He flew straight toward them. The TIE pilots never stood a chance. Superman moved through their formation like a guided missile, not striking the ships. He didn't want to kill the pilots, but simply accelerating past them at speeds that created shockwaves in the thin matter of space. The turbulence sent the fighters spinning, their systems overwhelmed by proximity to something moving at relativistic velocities. And then Superman just flew. Away from the Executor, away from Tatooine, out into the vast darkness of this unfamiliar galaxy, with no destination in mind except anywhere but here. He'd find the rebels, or they'd find him. Either way, he'd made his stand. Now he just had to figure out what came next. Behind him, on the bridge of the Executor, Darth Vader stood before the forward viewport, watching a blue and red streak of light fade into the distance at impossible speed. "Track him," Vader commanded. "My lord," an officer responded nervously. "His velocity exceeds our sensor range. We cannot." "Then use gravitational wake detection. Use mass shadow analysis. Use whatever methods necessary." Vader's mechanical breathing filled the bridge with its ominous rhythm. "The Emperor wants this being found, and the Emperor's will shall be done." "Yes, my lord," the officer replied, and the Executor's vast sensor arrays began their search. In the darkness of space, Superman flew alone and wondered what he'd just gotten himself into. The Y-Wing starfighter hung dead in space, its repulsor coils burned out and life support systems flickering on emergency power. Inside the cramped cockpit, a young rebel pilot named Janek Voss watched his oxygen counter tick down toward zero and tried very hard not to panic. The ambush had been perfect, 3 Imperial Star Destroyers dropping out of hyperspace around their supply convoy, TIE fighters swarming like insects. The rebel fleet had scattered, each ship fleeing independently to maximize survival odds. Janek's hyperdrive had failed mid-jump, dumping him into an uncharted system with a dying power core and no way to call for help. He had maybe 10 minutes of air left. Janek closed his eyes and thought of his family on Alderaan, hoped they'd understand he died fighting for something that mattered, hoped the rebellion would. Something struck his fighter's hull with a metallic thunk. Janek's eyes snapped open just in time to see a figure in red and blue float past his canopy. A man, in space, without a suit, moving as casually as if he were taking an afternoon stroll through a park instead of drifting through the airless void. The man, and Janek could see now it was definitely a man, human-looking at least, with dark hair and a distinctly concerned expression, made a circling gesture with one finger, the universal sign for roll down your window, which was absurd because they were in space, and the figure pointed emphatically at the cockpit's manual emergency release, then made an exaggerated breathing motion. Understanding dawned with a spike of terror. This impossible spacewalking stranger wanted Janek to open his cockpit, which would vent his remaining atmosphere and kill him in seconds. Unless this stranger had a plan. Janek had perhaps 6 minutes of air left. If he stayed in the cockpit, he died for certain. If he opened it, he probably died, but maybe, just maybe, this flying man had a solution. He reached for the emergency release. The canopy blew off in a burst of explosive bolts, and Janek's remaining air rushed out into vacuum with a sound like a scream cut short. His lungs burned, his vision started to tunnel, and then strong hands grabbed his flight suit and pulled him free of the dying fighter. The stranger pressed Janek's helmeted face against his own chest, and the rebel pilot felt, impossibly, warm breath against his skin. Air, actual breathable air being shared somehow, the stranger's own respiration creating a pocket of atmosphere in the vacuum. Janek gasped desperately, drawing in oxygen that shouldn't exist, and the stranger's other arm wrapped around him in a secure grip. And then they were moving, fast. Space blurred around them as the stranger accelerated to speeds no human body should survive. The G-forces alone should have liquefied Janek's internal organs. But somehow, he remained intact, cushioned in that impossible embrace as they rocketed through the void. 30 seconds later, they crashed through the hull of a derelict cargo hauler that Janek hadn't even noticed in the system. The stranger punched straight through reinforced durasteel like it was paper, carried them into an interior cargo bay, and gently set Janek down on the deck. The pilot collapsed to his knees, gasping, his hands trembling with adrenaline and oxygen deprivation. When he finally looked up, his rescuer was floating a few feet off the ground, examining the cargo bay with evident concern. "Are you all right?" the stranger asked in perfect basic, his voice carrying genuine worry. Janek's voice cracked. We were in space, how are you?" "It's complicated," the stranger said, which was possibly the greatest understatement Janek had ever heard. "What's your name?" Janek Voss, Rebel Alliance Red Squadron." The words came out automatically, trained response to interrogation. Then he blinked. "Wait, are you Superman?" The stranger's expression shifted to surprise. "You've heard of me." "Heard of you? You're the only thing the entire Alliance has talked about for the past 3 days. Janek struggled to his feet, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "You broke out of the Executor. You held open blast doors with your bare hands. You flew through vacuum without a suit. The Empire's calling you the most dangerous insurgent in the galaxy, and we're calling you," he paused, grinning despite everything, "our best hope for winning this war." Superman's expression darkened. "I'm not here to win your war. I'm trying to find a way home." "Right, yeah, I heard that too." Janek looked around the derelict cargo bay, noting the ancient containers marked with corporate logos decades out of date. "Where are we exactly?" "I don't know," Superman admitted. "I've been flying for 3 days, trying to put distance between myself and the Empire. I found this abandoned ship about 4 hours ago, thought I'd use it as a temporary base while I figured out my next move. Then I heard your fighter's distress signal." "You heard?" Janek shook his head. "From how far away?" "About 6,000 kilometers, Superman said, as if this were perfectly normal. "Your power core was failing catastrophically. I could hear the plasma leak from here." Janek processed this information, filed it away with all the other impossible things he'd witnessed in the past 5 minutes, and decided his brain could deal with it later. "Okay, thank you for saving my life. Seriously, thank you. But we need to get out of this system before an Imperial patrol finds us. Do you have a ship?" "No," Superman admitted. "I've just been flying. I can survive in space indefinitely, so I didn't think I needed one." Janek laughed, slightly hysterical. "You've been flying through space for 3 days without a ship." "I can break light speed if I really push it," Superman offered, as if this explained everything. "Though the navigation is tricky without reference points." Janek stared at this impossible being, this stranger from beyond the galaxy who spoke of faster-than-light travel, the way someone might discuss a morning jog. and felt the weight of cosmic absurdity pressing down on him. "The Alliance really needs to meet you properly," Janek said finally. "Can you carry me to the nearest rebel outpost? I'll navigate you. Do whatever it is you do." Superman hesitated, and Janek saw genuine uncertainty in those blue eyes. "I told Princess Leia I wasn't choosing sides. I don't want to become a weapon for anyone, even the people opposing the Empire." "You saved my life," Janek pointed out. "That's already choosing a side, isn't it? The Empire would have let me suffocate. You didn't." The argument seemed to hit home. Superman's jaw tightened and he nodded slowly. "Where's the nearest outpost?" "Yavin 4, Janek said immediately. "It's about 12 parsecs from here. I can give you coordinates, but..." He trailed off, realizing the problem. "I don't know how to navigate by your coordinate system," Superman finished. "I've been using stellar cartography, plotting courses by star positions. It works, but it's slow." Janek's eyes lit up. "Wait here." He scrambled back to his dying Y-wing through the hole Superman had created in the hull, spent 2 precious minutes retrieving his fighter's nav computer before the power core finally gave out completely, and returned with the compact device clutched triumphantly in his hands. "This has the coordinates for every major rebel base, supply depot, and safe house in this sector," Janek explained, activating the holographic display. A 3-dimensional map of local space materialized, dotted with hundreds of markers. "Can you memorize this?" Superman studied the hologram for exactly 5 seconds. "Got it." You memorized all of that in 5 seconds." "Enhanced cognitive processing," Superman said absently, his eyes still tracking the stellar positions. "It's one of the less impressive abilities, honestly. Okay, I know where Yavin 4 is relative to our current position. Ready to go." Janek swallowed hard, remembering the insane acceleration from earlier. "Do I have a choice?" "You could stay here and wait for rescue," Superman offered. "But given how remote this system is..." "Right, Yavin 4 it is." Janek secured his helmet and prepared himself mentally for what was about to happen. "Try not to kill me with the G-forces this time." "I'll be more careful," Superman promised, and his arms wrapped around Janek in a carry that would have been embarrassing under any other circumstances. They launched through the hull breach into open space, and this time Janek was conscious enough to experience the full terror of transatmospheric acceleration. Stars stretched into lines, then became a blur of light, and then Superman did something that made Janek's physics education scream in protest. He just went faster than light. No hyperdrive, no hyperspace tunnel, just pure velocity that exceeded the universal speed limit through what could only be described as brute force. The trip took 20 minutes. When they finally decelerated into Yavin 4's orbit, Janek was simultaneously grateful to be alive and questioning every scientific principle he'd ever learned. Below them, the lush jungle moon of Yavin rotated serenely, and clustered near the ancient temple structures on its surface, Janek could see the rebel fleet, dozens of ships, from massive cruisers down to single-seat fighters, all bearing the distinctive red and white Alliance markings. "That's home base," Janek managed through a throat tight with emotion. After 3 days of believing he'd never see it again, the sight of those familiar ships brought tears to his eyes. "The Great Temple, Alliance High Command is down there." Superman studied the fleet with evident concern. "That's your entire military force, against an empire with thousands of Star Destroyers." "We make do," Janek said defensively. "We're scrappy." "You're outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1, Superman corrected gently. How are you not already extinct? Because we don't fight them head-on. We strike fast, retreat faster, and make them chase shadows across the galaxy. It's not glamorous, but it keeps us alive. Janek pointed toward the largest of the temple structures. Can you set me down near that landing pad? I need to report to command, let them know you're here. Will they try to capture me like the Empire did? Superman asked carefully. The Alliance doesn't capture people who save our pilots' lives, Janek assured him. They'll want to talk, definitely. Maybe ask for help. But if you say no, they'll respect that. We're not the Empire. We actually mean it when we talk about freedom. Superman seemed to consider this, then nodded and began descending toward the moon's surface. The briefing room in the Great Temple was designed to accommodate perhaps 30 personnel comfortably. Currently, it held 57 people, all of them trying to get a glimpse of the stranger who just arrived carrying pilot Voss like a rescued damsel. Superman stood near the holographic projector at the room's center, acutely aware of every eye tracking his movement. He'd faced hostile crowds before, but this was different. These people weren't hostile. They were curious, hopeful, desperate even. It made him more uncomfortable than Imperial blasters had. Ladies, gentlemen, please. Princess Leia Organa's voice cut through the murmuring crowd with practiced authority. She stood on the raised platform at the room's far end, flanked by the broad-shouldered man Clark now knew was Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan, and the protocol droid designated C-3PO. I know you're all eager to meet our guest, but let's maintain some order. The crowd quieted somewhat, though the starring continued. Leia turned to Superman with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and calculated assessment. First, let me formally thank you for helping me and my father escape the Executor 3 days ago. The Empire's interrogation techniques are unpleasant. You saved us from that fate. You're welcome, Clark said simply. Though I'm sorry I couldn't stay with your ship. If I'd known the torpedo was going to hit. We survived, Bail Organa interrupted, his kind eyes crinkling with a smile. The Tantive IV is currently being repaired, and more importantly, we're alive to repair it. That's a better outcome than we had any right to expect. The question now, a stern-faced woman in a military uniform spoke up from the crowd, is what happens next. Superman, you've made yourself an enemy of the Empire. Whether you intended to or not, your actions on the Executor directly aided the rebellion. The Empire will hunt you relentlessly. And they'll find me eventually, Superman acknowledged. I'm not exactly subtle, but that doesn't mean I'm joining your war. I'm here because Pilot Voss said you had scientists who might help me find a way home. We do, Leia confirmed. But I won't lie to you, our resources are limited. The kind of research you're talking about, interdimensional physics and extragalactic travel, would normally require years of study and equipment we don't have. The Empire controls the major research institutions across the galaxy. Clark felt his hope sink. So you can't help me. I didn't say that, Leia corrected quickly. I said it would be difficult. We have brilliant minds in the Alliance, people who worked on the Death Star's hypermatter reactor, on experimental hyperspace technology, on projects the Empire deemed too dangerous to continue. If anyone can figure out how you got here and how to reverse it, they're with us. In exchange for what? Superman asked, because nothing in the universe was truly free. Information, Bail Organa said simply. We want to understand your abilities, your limitations, how you interact with the Force, or rather, how you don't. You represent something unprecedented, Superman. Not a Force user, not a technological construct, but something in between. That knowledge could be valuable. And Clark pressed, sensing there was more. Leia exchanged a glance with her father before continuing. And if you felt inclined to help us with certain, specific problems, while you're here, we would consider that a demonstration of good faith. Nothing that compromises your principles. Nothing that would make you a soldier in our war. Just, she gestured at the holographic display, which flickered to life showing a Star Destroyer in orbit over a lush green planet. The occasional intervention where your unique abilities could save lives. The hologram zoomed in to show Imperial troops herding civilians into detention centers, families being separated, children crying as stormtroopers checked identification documents. This is Lothal, Leia continued, her voice hardening. An outer rim world where the Empire has been increasingly brutal in suppressing dissent. 2 days ago, they arrested 3,000 civilians on suspicion of aiding the rebellion. Most of them are being held in a detention center while the Empire investigates. We have intelligence suggesting they plan to execute the lot as an example. Clark's fists clenched at his sides. That's genocide. That's the Empire, the stern military woman said flatly. And it happens on a dozen worlds every week. We do what we can, rescue missions, supply drops, intelligence gathering, but we're stretched too thin. We can't save everyone. But you could, Leia said, her eyes locked on Superman's. A being who can fly through Star Destroyer hulls, who can withstand turbolaser fire, who can move faster than TIE fighters can track. You could break into that detention center, free those prisoners, and be gone before the Empire could mount an effective response. It was manipulation, Clark realized. Clever, well-intentioned manipulation, but manipulation nonetheless. They were showing him suffering he couldn't ignore, counting on his heroic nature to override his reluctance to get involved. The frustrating part was that it was working. If I do this, Superman said slowly, I'm not doing it for the rebellion. I'm doing it because those people don't deserve to die for living under a dictatorship they didn't choose. We'll take it, Leia said immediately. Whatever your reasons, those 3,000 lives will be grateful. And the moment I intervene, the Empire will escalate, Clark continued, thinking through the implications. They'll send more troops, more Star Destroyers. They might even, he remembered Vader's threat, start targeting civilians to force me into the open. They might, Bail Organa agreed gravely. That's the risk of any resistance. The Empire always escalates, but the alternative is letting them commit atrocities unopposed, and that's not acceptable either. Clark looked around the room at the assembled rebels, young and old, human and alien, all of them united by opposition to tyranny. He saw determination in their faces, yes, but also fear and exhaustion. These people were fighting an impossible war against an enemy with infinite resources, and they were losing slowly. His presence could change that equation, could tip the balance, give them hope, maybe even save lives on a scale he'd never achieved on Earth. But it would also make him complicit in their war, draw him deeper into a conflict he didn't fully understand, potentially trap him in this galaxy permanently if finding a way home proved impossible. I need to think about it, Superman said finally, and I need to talk to your scientists first. If there's really no way home then, he trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. Of course, Leia said, though Clark could see the disappointment in her eyes. Dr. Urso will meet with you this afternoon. She's our lead researcher on exotic physics. If anyone can help you, it's her. Thank you, Clark said, and meant it. Even if the answer was ultimately you're stuck here, at least he'd know. Leia gestured toward a corridor. I'll have someone show you to guest quarters. They're not luxurious, but they're private. You can rest, recover, and we'll talk more later." Superman nodded and followed the young officer who'd been designated as his guide. As he walked through the ancient stone corridors of the Yavin Temple, he passed more rebels, pilots, technicians, soldiers, all of them stopping to stare at the man who'd become a legend in 3 days. He heard whispers as he passed. "That's him, that's actually him. I heard he tore through a Star Destroyer like it was paper. My cousin was on Tatooine when he fought Vader to a standstill. They say blasters don't even scratch him. Maybe we actually have a chance now." That last whisper made Clark's stomach twist. These people were already counting on him, already building him up as their savior. The weight of their hope was heavier than any Star Destroyer, more crushing than any Force attack. He'd felt this before on Earth, when civilians looked to him to solve problems beyond his control. But there, he'd had context, had understood the threats, the politics, the history. Here, he was operating blind, making decisions with incomplete information that could have consequences spanning star systems. The guest quarters turned out to be a converted meditation chamber with a stone bench, a small desk, and a window overlooking the jungle canopy. Spartan, but private as promised. Superman sat on the bench, which creaked alarmingly under his weight before he adjusted to hover slightly above it, and stared out at the alien jungle. Somewhere out there, beyond the trees and the atmosphere and the vast darkness of space, was his home. Earth, Lois, the Daily Planet, the Justice League, everything and everyone he'd sworn to protect. And he had no idea how to get back to them. A soft knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Come in," Clark called, grateful for the distraction. The door opened to reveal a woman in her mid-40s, her dark hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp with intelligence behind practical glasses. She carried a datapad and wore the slightly rumpled clothing of someone who spent more time in laboratories than on battlefields. "Dr. Galen Urso," she introduced herself, extending a hand. "Leia said you wanted to discuss dimensional physics and the theoretical possibility of trans-universal travel." Clark shook her hand carefully, always conscious of his strength around normal humans. "That's right. I need to know if getting home is even possible." Dr. Urso set her datapad on the desk and pulled up a holographic display showing equations. Clark's enhanced intellect immediately began parsing. Quantum mechanics, spatial topology, energy-matter relationships that were similar to, but distinct from Earth's physics. "I'll be honest with you," Urso said without preamble. "What you're describing, travel between dimensional planes, crossing from one reality to another, that's beyond anything we've attempted. The closest parallel would be hyperspace travel, which accesses an alternate dimension to enable faster-than-light movement. But hyperspace is still connected to our reality, bound by the same fundamental forces. And traveling between completely separate universes," Clark asked, though he already suspected the answer, "would require energy scales we can't generate," Urso admitted. "The theoretical calculations suggest you'd need to manipulate spacetime at a quantum level across dimensional barriers, essentially creating a controlled rift in the fabric of reality itself. The energy requirements would be astronomical, possibly greater than a star's total output." Clark felt his hope crumble. "So I'm stuck here." "I didn't say that," Urso corrected, and her eyes gleamed with scientific curiosity. "You said you were pulled here through a dimensional rift, correct? Something on your side created that energy, opened that doorway. If we could replicate the conditions that brought you here, we might be able to create a return path. How would we do that? First, I need to understand exactly what happened when you arrived. Every detail you can remember, the energy signatures, the physical sensations, the visual phenomena. Then I need to study you directly, understand how your biology interacts with our universe's physical laws. And then, she pulled up more equations. We need to find a power source capable of generating dimensional rift-level energies, which the Empire controls, Clark guessed. The largest reactors, yes, Urso confirmed. But there might be alternatives, ancient force nexuses, places where the barrier between realms is naturally thin, Kyber crystal formations that amplify energy beyond normal parameters. It's a long shot, but it's not impossible. Clark studied this scientist who was offering him genuine hope instead of false promises, who spoke of impossibilities as merely difficult challenges. Why are you helping me? You barely know me. Urso's expression softened. Because you're a long way from home and you're scared, and I know what that feels like. The Empire took my husband, my daughter, my life's work. The rebellion gave me purpose again, but I understand what it means to lose everything familiar. She paused. And because if you really are from another universe, that means there are other realities out there, other possibilities, other ways things could have gone. That's a beautiful thought. Before Clark could respond, alarms began shrieking throughout the temple complex. Both Superman and Dr. Urso rushed to the window, looking up toward Yavin 4's orbit. Through the atmosphere, Clark's telescopic vision picked out details that made his blood run cold. 6 Imperial Star Destroyers had just dropped out of hyperspace, and at the center of the formation, larger than any of its companions, was a vessel Clark recognized with a spike of dread. The Executor. Vader had found them. Alert Status 1, voices shouted in the corridors. All pilots to fighters, command to battle stations. This is not a drill.
Dr. Urso grabbed her datapad, her hands shaking. They've never attacked Yavin 4 directly before, never risked a full engagement with our main base. Why now? Superman knew the answer with terrible certainty. He could see it in the deployment pattern of the Star Destroyers, in the way TIE fighters were launching not in random swarms but in organized search patterns. They were here for him. The Empire had tracked him to Yavin 4, and now 3,000 rebel personnel were about to face the full might of Imperial military force. Because of him. Because he'd chosen to help the rebellion escape. Because he'd refused imprisonment. Because he dared to defy Vader and the Emperor. Clark turned from the window and flew, literally flew, stone walls be damned, toward the command center, smashing through ancient masonry like it was paper. Behind him, Dr. Urso shouted something, but he couldn't hear it over the roar of blood in his ears. He burst into the command center just as Princess Leia was coordinating the evacuation. All non-combat personnel to transport ships, fighter squadrons, form defensive perimeter. We need to buy time for. They're here for me, Superman interrupted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Every head in the room turned toward him. They tracked me here. If I leave, if I draw them away, they'll follow. Your people can evacuate safely. You don't know that, Leia argued. They might have found us through other intelligence. This could be. It's me, Clark insisted. He pointed at the holographic display showing the Executor's position. Vader's flagship is at the center of the formation. He doesn't leave his ship for routine base assaults. He's here specifically, which means the Emperor wants me badly enough to risk his most valuable enforcer. Bail Organa stepped forward, his expression grave. If you're right and you leave, you'll be facing 6 Star Destroyers alone. Even with your abilities, that's... I held back on the Executor, Superman said quietly. I was trying not to hurt anyone, trying to be careful. If I stop holding back, if I actually use my full strength. He met Bail's eyes steadily. I can tear those ships apart in minutes. The room went absolutely silent. You'd kill thousands, Leia said, and there was horror in her voice. Those ships have crew complements of 30,000 each. You'd... I'm not going to kill them, Clark interrupted firmly. I'm going to disable their ships, destroy weapons systems, targeting computers, propulsion, force them to retreat without killing anyone. That's impossible, the stern military woman, Admiral Akbar, Clark had learned, stated flatly. You can't surgically disable Star Destroyers without collateral damage. The systems are too integrated too. I have X-ray vision, Superman said. I can see every system, every crew member, every structural vulnerability. I can disable those ships without harming the people inside. It'll take time and it'll be dangerous, but I can do it. Leia studied him for a long moment, and Clark saw her making calculations behind those sharp eyes. She was weighing his life against her people's, measuring the propaganda value of his survival against the strategic benefit of his sacrifice. He saw the moment she made her decision. Do it, Leia said. But if it looks like you can't win, you run. Don't throw your life away for us. We're not worth that. Every life is worth that, Superman replied. And before anyone could argue, he accelerated through the command center's ceiling toward open space. The jungle canopy exploded around him as he rocketed upward at Mach 30, the acceleration so rapid that he left a vacuum tunnel in his wake. The atmosphere fell away, and the darkness of space opened before him. And there, hanging like predators over Yavin 4, were the 6 Star Destroyers. The Executor's sensors must have detected his launch immediately, because the entire fleet reoriented toward his position. Turbolaser batteries rotated, TIE fighter squadrons adjusted course, and across every ship, Clark's super hearing picked up the orders being transmitted. Target acquired, weapons free, capture if possible, destroy if necessary. Superman hung in the void between the planet and the fleet, and felt the weight of what he was about to do settle over his shoulders. This was it, the moment where he stopped being a lost stranger and became something else, a symbol, a weapon, a threat to the established order. He thought of Lois, wondered what she'd say about him getting involved in an alien civil war. Probably something sarcastic and loving in equal measure, followed by a demand that he be careful. He thought of the 3,000 rebels on the surface, counting on him to keep the Empire distracted long enough to evacuate. He thought of the 3,000 civilians on Lothal, waiting in detention centers for execution. And he thought of the name those rebel pilots had whispered, our best hope for winning this war. Clark Kent had never wanted to be anyone's weapon, had spent his entire life trying to use his power responsibly, carefully, always conscious of the line between protection and domination. But sometimes in a galaxy far, far away, you didn't get to choose your battles. Sometimes the battles chose you. Superman looked at the Imperial fleet, at the thousands of weapon systems powering up to kill him, and made his final decision. He stopped holding back. The Man of Steel became a blue and dread comet, and the Battle of Yavin began in earnest.
The first Star Destroyer never saw him coming. Superman crossed the distance between Yavin 4 and the Imperial fleet in 3 seconds, moving at velocities that turned space itself into a weapon. He struck the lead destroyer, not the Executor, not yet, at a precise point along its dorsal hull where his X-ray vision had identified the primary sensor array. The impact was catastrophic for the ship's systems. Durasteel crumpled like aluminum foil, the sensor dome collapsing inward as Superman punched through it and immediately reversed course, emerging from the opposite side before the crew even registered what had happened. Behind him, the destroyer's targeting computers went dark, its ability to track enemies suddenly reduced to visual confirmation only. "Sensor array destroyed," Clark said to himself, cataloging the damage. "Crew compartments intact, 0 casualties." Then the turbolasers opened fire. The void lit up with enough energy to glass a small moon. Hundreds of turbolaser batteries, each one capable of vaporizing starfighters, all converging on Superman's position with computer-guided precision. The barrage was so intense that space itself seemed to burn, the vacuum heating to plasma temperatures from the sheer concentration of energy. Superman flew straight through it. The bolt struck his body, his cape, his face, each impact releasing terajoules of energy that would have atomized anything made of matter found in this galaxy. Clark's Kryptonian cells absorbed the punishment, converting the thermal energy into fuel for his solar-powered physiology. It hurt, yes. The sustained barrage was like being caught in a cosmic sandstorm, but it didn't slow him down. He reached the second Star Destroyer and dove beneath its hull, his hands closing around the mounting bracket for one of its primary weapon batteries. The turbolaser assembly was the size of a small building, weighing hundreds of tons and designed to withstand the recoil of firing planet-killing weapons. Superman tore it off like a loose hangnail. The assembly came free in a shriek of tortured metal, sparks erupting from severed power conduits. Clark carefully, so carefully, ensured the explosive decompression didn't vent any crew compartments into space, then hurled the entire assembly away from the fleet where it would harm no one. "Main ventral battery disabled," he counted. "Still 0 casualties." A wing of TIE fighters swarmed around him, their pilots either brave or foolish enough to engage at close range. Their laser cannons opened up, red bolts crisscrossing space in a deadly web. Superman ignored them, focusing instead on the destroyer's hyperdrive generator that his X-ray vision had located deep in the engineering section. He flew straight through the hull. The sensation of punching through reinforced durasteel was becoming familiar. Resistance, then sudden give as molecular bonds failed under stress no engineer had ever anticipated. Clark carved a Superman-shaped tunnel through 12 decks, carefully avoiding crew quarters and life support systems, until he reached the massive hyperdrive core. The generator was a marvel of engineering, a fusion reactor wrapped in exotic matter containment fields that enabled faster-than-light travel. Damaging it wrong would create an explosion that could destroy the entire ship and everyone aboard. Clark placed both hands on the reactor's primary manifold and pulled, not hard enough to rupture containment, but sufficient to bend the couplings beyond operational tolerance. The hyperdrive sputtered, whined, and shut down automatically as safety systems detected the structural failure. "Hyperdrive disabled," Superman said, emerging from the destroyer's far side. "They're stuck in normal space now." Then Darth Vader arrived. The Dark Lord's TIE Advanced came screaming out of the Executor's hangar bay, its distinctive profile unmistakable among the swarm of standard fighters. Unlike the others, Vader didn't maintain distance. He flew straight at Superman, his fighters' weapons blazing. But more than that, Clark felt the Force attack. It was different than before, not a crushing grip or electrical discharge, but something more subtle. A pressure inside his head, probing at his thoughts, trying to invade his mind. Vader was attempting a telepathic assault, trying to read Superman's intentions or possibly even control him. It failed. Whatever barrier existed between Superman and the Force worked both ways. Vader couldn't touch his mind any more than he could meaningfully harm his body. Clark felt the attack wash over him like water off stone, completely ineffective. "You are alone," Vader's voice crackled over the fighter's external speakers, his mechanical breathing audible even over the combat noise. "Your rebel allies cannot reach you. You face the full might of the Empire with no support. Surrender now, and the Emperor may show mercy." "I don't need support," Superman replied, knowing Vader could hear him through the Force even across vacuum. "And I've seen your Emperor's mercy. I'm not impressed." He accelerated toward the third Star Destroyer. Vader matched his speed, or tried to. The TIE Advanced was the fastest fighter in the Imperial fleet, but it was still bound by the laws of physics as this galaxy understood them. Superman left it behind in seconds, covering kilometers while Vader struggled to keep pace. The third destroyer had learned from its companion's fate. As Superman approached, it angled its entire bulk to present minimum profile, concentrated its shields on the vector of his approach, and synchronized its turbolaser batteries for maximum overlapping fire. It was actually a decent strategy. The concentrated barrage struck Superman like a wall of solid force, hundreds of individual impacts blending into one continuous assault. For the first time since arriving in this galaxy, Clark actually had to brace himself, had to actively resist being pushed backward by the sheer volume of firepower. His cape disintegrated, the Kryptonian fabric finally succumbing to sustained bombardment. Burns appeared on his suit, superficial, already healing, but visible proof that this level of firepower could actually affect him. "Shields holding at 90%, a voice crackled over the destroyer's comm channels, which Superman could hear perfectly despite the vacuum. "Target is not evading. Maintain fire. We can wear him down." They were right. If Superman simply hovered here taking damage, eventually even his incredible durability would be tested. The twin suns of this system weren't as energizing as Earth's yellow sun, and he was expending energy faster than he could replenish it. So he stopped flying toward the destroyer and flew through it instead. Not punching a small tunnel this time, but creating a massive breach that ran the entire length of the ship. Superman accelerated to hypersonic speeds and simply rammed through the Star Destroyer from bow to stern, his invulnerable body tearing through every deck, every bulkhead, every structural support in a perfectly straight line. The destroyer's structural integrity collapsed catastrophically. The ship didn't explode. Clark had carefully avoided the reactor cores and ammunition magazines, but it broke in half, the two sections separating as internal explosion suppression systems activated and emergency bulkheads sealed. Through it all, Superman's enhanced hearing tracked every crew member, every life sign. He'd plotted his path to miss all occupied sections. The ship was dead in space, split like a gutted fish, but its crew remained alive in sealed compartments. 3 down, Clark panted, feeling genuine exertion now. 3 to go. The fourth and fifth destroyers opened fire simultaneously, their combined firepower even more intense than what he'd just endured. Superman weaved between the bolts now, no longer able to simply tank every hit. His cellular reserves were depleting, his solar charge running low. He needed to end this faster. Clark flew beneath the fourth destroyer and grabbed its keel, the massive structural spine that ran the length of the ship. His fingers dug into durasteel and he pulled. The Star Destroyer groaned like a living thing as Superman exerted leverage that shouldn't be possible. Metal screamed, rivets popped, and the entire ship began to bend. Not enough to break it in half, but sufficient to warp the frame beyond any hope of repair. Turbolaser batteries twisted out of alignment, unable to fire without destroying their own hull. Hallways became ramps as the deck tilted at increasing angles. Structural failure across all sections, panicked voices screamed over the comm. We're losing gravity, engineering reports. Superman released the keel and moved to the fifth destroyer before the fourth's crew could even process what had happened. This time he targeted the engines directly, tearing through the hull to reach the massive ion drive arrays. He ripped out power couplings with surgical precision, his X-ray vision ensuring he never touched anything that would cause critical failure. The destroyer went dark, its engines dead, life support switching to emergency reserves. 5 disabled, Clark said, and turned to face the Executor. Vader's flagship hung in space like a predator, twice the size of its companions, bristling with enough weapons to reduce a planet's surface to molten slag. Every turbolaser battery was trained on Superman, and the Dark Lord himself stood on the bridge, his presence like a dark star that Clark could somehow sense even without the Force. Impressive, Vader's voice echoed across open channels. You have disabled 5 Star Destroyers without killing their crews. Your restraint is admirable and futile. The Executor fired. Not with turbolasers, with its tractor beams. Superman felt invisible force grip him from multiple angles, 12 separate tractor beam projectors locking onto his biosignature and pulling. It wasn't like the Force attacks. This was pure mechanical force, gravity manipulation on a massive scale designed to capture and immobilize capital ships. Clark struggled against the beams, his muscles straining as he tried to fly free. For several seconds he made progress, actually pulling against the combined might of technology designed to move objects millions of times his mass. But the Executor had power reserves that dwarfed what the smaller destroyers could generate, and more importantly, Vader was doing something else. The Force attacks resumed, but different this time, not trying to crush or electrocute, but working in concert with the tractor beams to restrict Superman's movement. Vader was using the Force as a multiplier, adding his considerable power to the mechanical systems. It was working. Superman found himself being pulled inexorably toward the Executor's ventral hangar bay, where he could see blast doors opening to reveal what looked like a specialized containment cell. They'd prepared for this, he realized. Had built a prison specifically designed to hold something with his capabilities. You cannot escape, Vader stated with absolute confidence. The Emperor foresaw your resistance. The cage that awaits you was designed by the finest minds in the Empire, incorporating technology you cannot begin to comprehend. You will be studied, analyzed, and eventually you will serve. Clark gritted his teeth and made a decision he'd been avoiding. He stopped pulling against the tractor beams and instead flew with them, accelerating toward the Executor faster than its systems could compensate for. The sudden reversal confused the targeting computers for a critical half-second. Superman used that half-second to alter his trajectory by 10 degrees. Instead of flying into the hangar bay, he crashed into the Executor's bridge tower. The impact was apocalyptic. Reinforced viewports shattered, durasteel supports crumpled, and Superman emerged inside the command center where dozens of officers stared in absolute shock. Before anyone could react, Clark had already located the shield generator controls and crushed them with one hand. The Executor's defensive shields flickered and died. "Evacuate the bridge," someone screamed, but Superman was already gone, punching through the deck toward the tractor beam generators deep in the ship's interior. He found the first generator, a massive assembly of gravitic manipulation technology, and simply ripped out its primary power coupling. The tractor beam died. He found the second generator, the third, moving through the Executor like a ghost, immune to the bulkheads and security systems meant to slow intruders. Crew members caught glimpses of him, a blue and red blur that appeared and disappeared through solid walls, and panic spread through the ship faster than any official communication could manage. Intruder on deck 47. Contact lost, repeat contact. He's in engineering. How is he moving through walls? Superman found the primary reactor, the massive power core that fed the Executor's incomprehensible energy demands, and stopped. This was it, the heart of Vader's flagship. He could destroy it right now, could cripple the ship beyond any hope of repair. But the reactor's failure would kill thousands of crew members in the subsequent cascade failure, would make him exactly what the Empire claimed: a terrorist, a killer, a threat to innocent life. He wouldn't cross that line, not even here, not even now. Instead, Superman flew to the Executor's main hyperdrive and did what he'd done to the smaller destroyers: bent the couplings just enough to make faster-than-light travel impossible. The flagship could still maneuver, could still fight, but it couldn't chase him across the galaxy anymore. "Hyperdrive offline," a panicked voice reported somewhere above. "We're stuck in normal space, estimate 3 weeks for repairs." Clark emerged from the hull on the Executor's far side, looked back at the damaged but still functional flagship, and felt a moment of satisfaction. Then Vader found him. The Dark Lord must have used emergency escape pods or some kind of personal craft to exit the ship, because suddenly he was there in open space, surrounded by what looked like a personal force field bubble that provided atmosphere and protection. "You dare," Vader's mechanical voice trembled with rage, "to board my ship, to damage my vessel, to defy the Emperor's will so brazenly." Superman faced him across the void, both of them floating in space like ancient gods preparing for battle. "I dared to say no," Clark replied, "and I'll keep saying it until you accept that I'm not yours to command." Vader raised both hands, and the force attack that followed was unlike anything Clark had experienced before. It wasn't physical force or electricity or telepathy. It was pure dark side energy, channeled with decades of practice and absolute conviction in its power. Reality itself seemed to warp around Superman. The stars twisted, space folded, and Clark felt his cellular structure being attacked at a quantum level. This wasn't Vader trying to crush him with telekinesis. This was the Dark Lord attempting to unmake him, to disassemble his very atoms through sheer will and the Force's reality-bending properties. It hurt, actually, genuinely hurt in ways nothing else in this galaxy had managed. Superman screamed, not from physical pain, but from the sensation of having his fundamental existence questioned by a force he didn't understand. His Kryptonian biology held firm, barely, but Vader's attack was pushing him to limits he'd rarely encountered. "You see now," Vader intoned, his hands crackling with dark energy, "the true power of the Force. You may be immune to physical harm, but your very existence is subject to universal laws, and I have spent decades learning to bend those laws to my will." Clark fell to one knee in the void, his body spasming as the attack continued. Below, he could hear rebel ships launching from Yavin 4, could hear Leia's voice ordering all personnel to evacuate while the Empire was distracted. They were getting away. His sacrifice was buying them time. But Vader wasn't going to let him live. This attack wasn't meant to capture anymore. It was meant to destroy. Superman reached deep inside himself, to the solar energy stored in every cell, and released it all at once. His heat vision exploded outward in a hemisphere of coherent thermal radiation, not aimed at Vader specifically, but radiating in all directions. The temperature in the immediate area spiked to levels normally found in stellar cores, and the Dark Lord's force field bubble strained to contain the onslaught. Vader's concentration broke for just a moment. It was enough. Superman flew straight up, relative to the galactic plane, at speeds approaching relativistic velocities. He left Yavin 4 behind in seconds, left the entire star system behind in a minute, flew until the Executor was nothing but a distant point of light that his telescopic vision could barely distinguish. He flew until his solar reserves were completely exhausted, until his body was running on fumes and cellular debt. He flew until space itself seemed to blur around him. And then, finally, in an empty region between stars where nothing lived and no one could find him, Superman stopped. He floated in the absolute darkness, his cape gone, his suit burned and torn, his body aching in ways he'd rarely experienced. Below, or rather, in the direction he designated as below, he could see Yavin's star, a yellow point of light that was too far away to meaningfully recharge him. Clark closed his eyes and tried to slow his breathing, tried to calm the adrenaline still coursing through his system. He'd disabled 6 Star Destroyers without killing anyone. He'd bought the rebellion time to evacuate. He'd proven that the Empire wasn't invincible, that even their greatest ships and their most powerful enforcer could be defied. But he'd also made himself the most wanted being in the galaxy, had drawn the Emperor's full attention, and had discovered that the Force, when wielded by someone with Vader's skill, could actually harm him. And he was no closer to getting home. Superman opened his eyes and stared at the unfamiliar stars, feeling more alone than he had since Krypton exploded. Somewhere, light years away, Princess Leia was coordinating the rebel evacuation. Dr. Urso was analyzing the data from their brief meeting, looking for ways to send him home. Vader was reporting to the Emperor about the greatest threat the Empire had faced in decades. And Clark Kent, son of Krypton, the last survivor of a dead world, floated in the darkness between stars and wondered what he'd become. The monastery on Jedha was ancient beyond measure, carved into living rock by Force sensitives who predated the Jedi Order itself. Its corridors wound through the moon's crust-like veins, connecting chambers where pilgrims had once sought enlightenment. Now those chambers housed rebel intelligence operatives, scattered refugees, and one very exhausted Kryptonian. Superman had drifted in space for 6 hours before a rebel search team found him. His solar reserves so depleted he'd actually lost consciousness, something that hadn't happened since he was a teenager learning to control his powers. They brought him here, To this hidden sanctuary on a moon the Empire had strip mined for kyber crystals, but never fully pacified. "You're awake," Dr. Urso's voice came from the doorway. She carried a tray with what looked like water and some kind of protein bar. "How do you feel?" "Like I went 12 rounds with Doomsday," Clark admitted, accepting the water gratefully. His body was already recovering. The monastery's position gave him direct exposure to Jedha's sun through crystalline skylights, but the exhaustion went deeper than physical. "How long was I out?" 48 hours, Urso said, settling into a chair across from him. "Long enough for the Empire to lock down half the Outer Rim searching for you. They're calling you the most dangerous insurgent in galactic history. There's a bounty on your head that could buy a small fleet." "Wonderful," Clark said without enthusiasm. "And the rebels, did everyone get away from Yavin?" "Mostly. We lost 3 transports during the evacuation. TIE fighters caught them before they could jump to hyperspace. But over 90% of our personnel escaped. Thanks to you." Urso paused. "You bought us time we desperately needed. The Alliance Command wants to formally thank you." "I don't need thanks," Superman said quietly. "I just need to go home." Urso's expression shifted to something between sympathy and scientific excitement. "That's actually why I'm here. I've been analyzing the energy readings from your fight with Vader, cross-referencing them with theoretical models of dimensional rifts, and I think I've found something." She activated a holographic projector, displaying complex equations that Clark's enhanced intellect absorbed instantly. "When Vader attacked you with concentrated dark side energy, your cellular structure responded by releasing massive amounts of stored solar radiation. That release created a brief, and I mean microseconds brief, fluctuation in local spacetime. It wasn't enough to create a rift, but it proved something important. Your biology can interact with dimensional barriers." Clark leaned forward, hope kindling in his chest. "Meaning?" "Meaning if we can amplify that effect, if we can create conditions where you release energy at the exact frequency needed to resonate with dimensional barriers, we might be able to punch through to your reality." Urso pulled up another display, this one showing a massive crystalline structure. "This is the Temple of the Kyber on Jedha. It's the largest concentration of kyber crystals in the known galaxy, and kyber has unique properties when it comes to energy amplification." "You want to use me as a dimensional tuning fork," Superman understood immediately. "Charge me up with solar energy, have me release it all at once through the kyber crystals, and hope the amplified output creates a rift." "Exactly. It's dangerous. If the calculations are wrong, the energy release could destroy this entire moon. And even if it works, we don't know if the rift will be stable enough for you to transit. You might have one shot, maybe seconds, to get through before it collapses." "What are the odds it works?" Urso met his gaze steadily. "Honestly, maybe 30%, but it's the best option we have. The Empire controls every other facility capable of generating the necessary power levels, and even if you could break into one of their research stations, they'd have countermeasures ready by now." Clark thought about the risks, about the possibility of dying in an attempt to go home, about leaving this galaxy to fight its war without him. "And if it doesn't work, if I survive but the rift doesn't form?" "Then you're stuck here," Urso admitted. "And the Empire will know exactly where to find you, because an energy release of that magnitude will register on sensors across half the galaxy." It was a terrible plan with astronomical risks and minimal chance of success. It might kill him, might destroy an entire moon, might accomplish nothing except announcing his location to every Imperial Star Destroyer in range. but it was a chance, the only chance he might ever get. "How long do I need to charge up?" Superman asked. "At least 72 hours of direct solar exposure," Urso calculated. "We've cleared the monastery's upper observation deck for you. Jedha's sun isn't ideal for your physiology, but given enough time, you should reach maximum capacity. And the rebels, if I do this, if it creates an energy signature that big, the Empire will come here in force. You'll be putting everyone on this moon at risk." "We're already at risk," Urso said simply. "We're at war, Superman. Every day we're at risk. But if this works, if you make it home," she smiled sadly, "at least you'll be safe. At least one person in this entire mess gets a happy ending." Clark wanted to argue, wanted to insist that he couldn't accept safety while others remained in danger. But the exhaustion in Urso's eyes, the quiet desperation of someone who'd lost everything and found purpose in helping others, he recognized it because he'd seen it in the mirror plenty of times. "Okay," Superman said, "let's try it." The next 3 days passed in a strange liminal space between hope and resignation. Superman spent his daylight hours on the observation deck, floating in meditation while Jedha's sun slowly recharged his depleted cells. At night, or what passed for night in the monastery's artificial schedule, he walked the ancient corridors and talked with rebels. He met pilots who'd survived impossible odds, technicians who kept aging equipment functional through ingenuity and desperation, medics who treated injuries with limited supplies. Every one of them knew they were fighting a losing war, but none of them were willing to surrender. Leia visited on the second day, accompanied by her father and the protocol droid, who never stopped worrying aloud about the various ways the dimensional rift could catastrophically fail. "You don't have to do this," Leia said, standing beside Superman on the observation deck while the sun beat down. "Stay, help us. With your abilities, we could actually win this war." "You could," Clark agreed. "But at what cost? Every action I take escalates the Empire's response. How long before they start executing civilians in systems I've been seen in, trying to draw me out? How long before I have to choose between saving one planet and allowing another to burn?" "We make those choices every day," Leia said quietly. "It never gets easier." "I know, but this isn't my war to fight. These aren't my people to save, no offense." "None taken. I understand the difference between choosing to fight and being forced into it." Leia was quiet for a moment. "If you make it home, will you remember us? Will you tell people about the galaxy far, far away where ordinary people fought impossible odds for freedom?" "I'll remember," Superman promised. "And if there's ever a way back, if I ever find a way to return here, I'll help you finish what you started." "I'll hold you to that," Leia said, and squeezed his hand before leaving him alone with the sun. On the third day, Dr. Urso declared him fully charged. His cells were saturated with solar energy, practically glowing with stored power. He felt stronger than he had since arriving in this galaxy, his abilities operating at near-peak capacity. They gathered in the Temple of the Kyber at dawn. Urso, Leia, Bail, a dozen rebel scientists, and half the monastery's population who'd come to witness this historic attempt. The temple's interior was breathtaking, massive crystal formations jutting from floor and ceiling, each one humming with barely contained energy. Superman stood at the chamber's center, where the Kyber concentration was highest, and closed his eyes. "Remember," Urso called from behind protective barriers, "you need to release all your stored energy simultaneously. Heat vision, physical aura, everything. The Kyber will amplify and focus it, and if the dimensional resonance is right, I'll punch a hole between realities, Clark finished. I understand. He thought of Earth, of Lois waiting for him, probably worried sick by now, of the Justice League wondering where he'd gone, of Metropolis and all the people who depended on him. He thought of this galaxy, of brave people fighting tyranny against impossible odds, of Vader's darkness and the Emperor's cruelty, of Leia's determination and Urso's hope. Thank you, Superman said to everyone assembled, for everything, for helping a stranger who literally fell from the sky, for treating me like a person instead of a weapon. I won't forget you. Then he released everything. Heat vision erupted from his eyes in concentrated beams of thermal radiation. His bioelectric aura exploded outward in a sphere of golden light. Every cell in his body discharged its solar energy simultaneously, and the Kyber crystals caught that release and amplified it 1,000-fold. The temple became a star. Light blazed from every crystal surface, reflecting and amplifying until the chamber was bright enough to be seen from orbit. The energy built and built, reaching frequencies that made reality itself vibrate, and then space tore. A rift opened in midair, edges crackling with dimensional instability. Through it, Clark could see something familiar, stars in configurations he recognized, a cosmic geography that belonged to his home universe. It was small, maybe 6 feet across and already collapsing. Superman didn't hesitate. He flew toward the rift at maximum speed. Behind him, he heard Leia shout something, a goodbye or a warning or maybe just his name. He heard the Kyber crystals beginning to crack from strain, heard Urso yelling about Cascade failure, heard C-3PO wailing about impending doom. And then he was through. The transition was agony. His body existed in 2 realities simultaneously for one impossible moment, stretched across dimensional barriers that tried to tear him apart. He felt every atom of his being question its own existence, felt the fundamental forces of 2 different universes fighting over which physics should govern his form. Then he was falling through Earth's atmosphere, the familiar yellow sun of his adopted home system flooding his cells with revitalizing energy. Below, he could see Metropolis, the Daily Planet building, the park where he'd first met Lois. He was home. Superman touched down in that park, his legs almost buckling from relief and residual pain. People nearby stared, shouted his name, rushed toward him with phones raised to capture the moment. Superman, where have you been? We thought you were dead. What happened to your cape? Clark couldn't answer, could only stand there breathing Earth's air, feeling Earth's sun, being surrounded by Earth's people. He'd made it, against all odds, through dimensional barriers and Imperial fleets and the Dark Lord of the Sith himself. He'd found his way home. But as the crowd pressed closer, and someone mentioned that he'd only been gone for 3 days Earth time, while he'd experienced weeks in the Star Wars galaxy, Clark found himself thinking about the people he'd left behind. Were the rebels safe? Had the Empire traced the energy signature to Jedha? Was Leia organizing evacuation protocols while Vader's fleet closed in? Superman, a reporter asked, thrusting a microphone toward him. Can you tell us where you've been? Clark looked at the microphone, at the gathering crowd, at the familiar skyline of Metropolis. He thought about classified information, about protecting sources, about the responsibility of knowing things others didn't. It's a long story, Superman said finally, and I'll tell it, but first I need to see Lois. In the days that followed his return, Superman struggled to readjust to Earth. The physics were right now. Gravity felt natural. Solar energy charged his cells efficiently. But something fundamental had changed. He'd seen a galaxy where evil ruled through overwhelming force, where good people fought impossible odds with courage alone. He'd been offered the chance to be a god among mortals and had chosen instead to be a stranger seeking only to go home. The Justice League debriefed him extensively. The dimensional rift he'd fallen through had been detected by Earth's sensors as a massive energy anomaly, but the details of where it led remained classified. Only Batman guessed the full truth, reading between the lines of Clark's carefully edited report. "You found a galaxy at war," Bruce said during one of their private conversations, "and you walked away." "I helped them evacuate," Clark corrected. "I bought them time, but yes, ultimately I walked away." "Are you okay with that choice?" Clark was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Part of me wonders if I abandoned them. If I could have done more, should have done more. But I'm not a conqueror, Bruce. I'm not meant to reshape other worlds according to my values. Even if those values include freedom and justice." "Especially then," Superman said firmly. "The moment I start believing my way is the only way, the moment I use my power to force compliance even with the best intentions, that's when I become what I fight against." Lois understood better than anyone. She held him that first night back, let him process the experience without judgment, and then asked the question that cut to the heart of everything. "If you could go back, if there was a way to return and help them, would you?" Clark thought about Leia's determination, about Urso's hope, about all those rebel pilots who'd looked at him like he represented their salvation. He thought about the 3,000 civilians still waiting execution on Lothal, about the countless billions living under Imperial tyranny. "Yes," he admitted, "if there was a way back, if I could help them without making things worse, yes, I would." Lois smiled sadly. "That's what I thought. You're going to spend the rest of your life wondering about them, aren't you?" "Probably," Clark agreed. "But I'll spend it here where I belong, protecting the people I know, the world I understand. Maybe that's not heroic enough for some people's definition, but it's the best I can do." "It's enough," Lois assured him. "You're always enough, Clark." But late at night, when sleep eluded him, Superman would float above Metropolis and look at the stars. Somewhere out there, across dimensional barriers and impossible distances, a war continued. Good people fought bravely against darkness, probably wondering what happened to the strange visitor who'd briefly given them hope. He couldn't help them now. The dimensional rift was gone, Dr. Urso's calculations buried in a galaxy he could no longer reach. But Clark made himself a promise. If the opportunity ever arose, if fate or science or cosmic coincidence ever opened another door between realities, he would remember. He would remember Princess Leia's courage, Dr. Urso's kindness, Janek's gratitude. He would remember the feeling of holding open blast doors while people escaped to freedom, of disabling warships without killing their crews, of standing alone against an empire and saying simply, firmly, "No asterisk." And if that door ever opened again, Superman would walk through it, not as a conqueror or a god, but as an ally, a friend, a symbol of hope for people who desperately needed one. Because that's what heroes did. They remembered, they cared. And when given the choice between safety and sacrifice, they always chose the path that protected others, even when those others lived in galaxies far, far away. The Force might not have touched Clark Kent, but his presence had touched that galaxy nonetheless. And in hidden rebel bases across Imperial space, in whispered conversations between freedom fighters who'd heard the legend, a new hope persisted. The man from beyond the stars had proven the Empire wasn't invincible, and if he could defy Vader and survive, maybe, just maybe, ordinary people could too. It wasn't much, but in a war against impossible odds, hope was everything. And somewhere in a reality parallel to his own, that hope continued to burn.